As long as it was buried and forgotten about, it would degrade, weaken and wither. But he was wrong. Wildfire left to mature in darkness strengthens with age. And becomes less stable. More easily ignited. A beam of sunlight might set it off, a thump, a shake, vibration. This time the silence was longer. "Do you mean to say," Robert said eventually, "that every time I have seated my ass on that damn chair there has been a cache of wildfire beneath it somewhere?" "Either three," at the door chorused. "My brother said that the pyromancers brewed a lake of the wretched stuff," Tyrion said hoarsely. "Your Grace, we must send a raven to King's Landing at once, telling them to search most carefully. My brother believes this wildfire tale. It explains everything I always wondered about the death of the last Targaryen king." "Not a raven," Robert said with a sigh. "Ravens. 5 at least, this is too important for just one. And 2 to White Harbor, with messages to send to King's Landing by ship." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Damn it. This changes a few things. But it doesn't change one thing. I have to tell my children that I am not their father." He glanced at Ned. "Fetch your maester. We have messages to send. And then I have to visit my children." Sandor. Gods, what a mess this was. He knew the implications of that sword clanking or chiming as some had heard it at once. The bitch queen of Westeros had not just been fucking her own brother but very likely had been fucking other men who were not her husband for a long time. Long enough to mean that the royal children were not royal at all. His high and mightiness in Casterly Rock was not going to like this one bit. Not that he minded that one bit. Fuck Tywin Lannister. No. The problem was that Prince Brat did not realize what had happened earlier that day and was still ranting about father needed to punish the bastards for lying to him and that perhaps he should take it on himself to order his dog to punish them instead. He eyed the boy balefully as he stalked about the room, still fuming. Well, too bad. Laying a hand against the king's actual children, rather than his supposed children, would be a fast way to get Stormbreaker acquainted with his neck. He wasn't a fool. "Your father, His Grace the King, sent you to this room and told you to stay in this room," he finally ground out. "Stay in this room. I'll be outside. I'll be guarding this bloody room. Now listen, dog," the brat snarled. "I want you to find that upstart blacksmith and I'll do nothing to him. The king likes him. If I harm a hair on his head then the king will want to know why and who ordered me to. And I'll have no choice but to tell him. You want the king angry with you. That shut the brat up." He glared at him and then waved a hand in dismissal. As Sandor retreated outside and closed the door he wondered just why whatever gods might exist were punishing him so badly. His burns were bad enough, but first he'd been the sworn sword of that blonde bitch and then the brat. There were times when there wasn't enough ale in the world to drown his bitterness. What next after this? A bastard, even a hill, would not need a sworn sword. What would old Tywin do? He frowned for a moment. Who was the father? Was it that smug fucker the Kingslayer? He pulled a face and then decided that he didn't care. Jaime Lannister was an entitled smirking bastard and some time in a cell might just do him some good. Boots thumped in the corridor and he looked up to see Selmy, a grim-faced Selmy, with the eyes of a man who was truly dangerous, came into view, with the bulk of the king behind him. Now there was a man who was beyond dangerous. He'd changed. Selmy nodded at him and Sandor opened the door for the king, who glowered at him suspiciously for a moment before nodding slightly at him. "In," he said grimly. "I need people to witness this." In he went, in time to see the brat stand hurriedly and then stare at the king. "Father! What in the 7 hells is going on? First mother is in her room and now all this nonsense with your bastards and—" "Joffrey, sit down," the king said in what Sandor suspected was the softest voice that he could manage. "I need to talk to you." The brat scowled, wiped the look off his face at the sight of his father and then sat sulkily on the nearest chair. The king sat down on the sturdiest chair he could lay his hand on and then sat there, looking intensely uncomfortable for a long moment. "Joffrey," he started, and that stopped as he scowled at the fireplace. Then he started again. "Joffrey," again he stopped. The brat was staring at his father with a lot of confusion on his face. "Is everything all right, father?" The king scowled at his own feet and then rallied, looking at the brat full in the face. You were asking about your mother. She's under arrest. It's treason, lad. This baffled the brat, who just stared at the king. What do you mean, treason? Mother's the queen. Queens can't commit treason. The king's eyes took on that flinty look that meant that he was reining in his temper a bit. They can when they betray their king. Their husband. Joffrey, your mother betrayed me. She was discovered having relations with another man. The king's face was a bit flushed and the flinty look was positively stony by now. The brat still looked baffled, but shock was starting to creep in a bit. What? The word was spat out in a confused and almost frightened voice. But, she wouldn't do that. She did. Says who? There were witnesses. Lord Stark for one. It was here that the brat looked contemptuous. Stark. But mother says that he's nothing more than a northern oaf, and... The king stood up so abruptly that the chair flew back and the brat actually cringed. Ned Stark is no oaf, Joffrey. Be very careful when you speak of him. The brat gulped. But father, mother would never. She did. The king pulled a face as he sat down again. With her own twin brother. Revulsion rippled over the brat's face. Father, that's disgusting. What a stupid accusation. Mother would never do that with Uncle Jaime. She did, the king said flatly. They were seen by Lord Stark, Lord Baratheon and Sir Barristan Selmy. In full sight. There can be no denying it. Which is why I am here. Joffrey, we don't yet know how long that your mother has been betraying me. What I do know though is that you didn't hear the sword. The brat stared at him, baffled. That sword again. Father, all your bastards lied. Lied to your face. And you need to punish them. Swords don't chime. I heard it chime. The king said the words heavily. So did Stannis and Shireen. The sword is tied to those with the blood of Duran God's grief. And that's the problem. What problem? The brat was still baffled, and by all the gods was he stupid as well. I'm your son, but I didn't hear any chime. The king blinked and then tilted his head a little as he peered at the brat. Gods, he muttered, this is going to be harder than I thought. He scratched the back of his head and then tried again. Joffrey, those with the blood of Duran God's grief heard the sword chime. You, your brother and your sister did not hear it. You all have gold hair and green eyes. You don't resemble me at all. In any way. Do you see what I mean now? The brat blinked at this and then he went white with shock as the king's words finally sank in. No, no, father. I am your son. I am your heir. I am a prince of the realm. I will be king after you. I might take after mother's line, but I am still your son. You are not my son. I am sorry, but given how much you look like a Lannister, your real father might well be the man your mother was caught with. The king looked tired and strained. There is nothing of me in you. I am sorry, lad. I am not good at this, I've never been one for words, but you did not hear the sword. No. Joffrey leapt to his feet, his eyes wide and his face contorted with what might be panic with a bit of fury. I am your son. I am a prince. Sound the sword again, I will hear it chime. I wasn't sitting in the right place, I did not take it seriously, sound it again. You did not hear it the first time, the king muttered. It's no use, lad. Now, I'll need to talk to your grandfather. Not sure if that makes you a Hill or a Waters, given who your father might be, but... Sound the sword again. The brat looked almost demented now. I am a prince. Sound the sword again. No, ask him to hold it. Sandor was surprised with himself, the words slipped out of his mouth without much thought. Everyone stared at him in surprise and he shrugged a little. He tried to pick it up in your cabin before White Harbor, your grace. It burned his hand and threw him across the room. False was the word I heard in my head. The king stared at the brat, his eyes narrowing. Is that true, boy? Did you try to hold Stormbreaker? The brat put his gloved hands behind his back. No, he quavered, before sending a look of utter hatred at Sandor, who didn't give a damn. He'd been hired to protect the prince and the brat was now a bastard. I did not try and hold it. The king squinted at him. Gods, you're a terrible liar, boy. I noticed that you've been wearing gloves a lot. Let me see your hand. The white-faced brat shook his head for a moment and then, as the king glowered at him, he finally pulled his shaking hands into view, before slipping the gloves off. At a gesture from the king he showed his palms and the burn line that crossed the right one. The king stared at it. And then he gestured to Selmy, who was carrying that bloody sword. Sir Barristan, you can carry it, but Joffrey cannot. Why? The old man frowned slightly as he stepped up next to the king. I am merely the sword-bearer, your grace, as my forefathers were to yours. I have no claim on this sword, I would never dare to call it mine. I know little of such things, but I would hazard that falsely claiming to be worthy enough to bear it might result in repercussions. Sandor thought about this. You mean, if I tried to steal it, it might bite me as well? The old Kingsguard eyed him, before nodding. I wasn't trying to steal it. It will be mine one day. I am your son, father. I am a prince. I will be king. The brat looked half deranged again. The king frowned at the brat for a moment and then he reached out, took the sword from Selmy and then held it out hilt first to the brat. Then take it. If you claim to be my son, prove it. Take the sword. There was a long moment of utter silence as the brat stood there and quivered like a leaf, his eyes fixed on the hilt. He was as white as a sheet, almost green, and he seemed to be thinking furiously. And then he slowly raised his right hand and reached out to place it over pommel, before gulping. I am Joffrey Baratheon and this sword will one day be mine. The brat's fingers curled around the pommel and there was a long moment of nothing and then the sword seemed to flare with light. False, boomed a voice that seemed to come from nowhere and then the brat was flying backwards, just as he had on the ship. He landed on a table, which just about survived the impact and jerked backwards. Once again there was the slight smell of charred flesh in the air, along with something else. Fetch the maester, the king sighed as he stood up. And get the boy some new underwear, it smells like he'll need it. He looked at the brat, who was clutching at his hand, and his face hardened. Well, that's that. Joffrey Hill it is. Clegane, guard him. Stop him from doing anything stupid. Sandor stared at the groaning brat. Easier said than done. Tyrion. He felt numb. There was every chance that Jaime was going to die. It was treason. Worse, it was stupid treason. He loved his brother, but Jaime had been a complete imbecile. And now everything was numb. The name of Lannister had plunged to new depths and all his plans were now in ruins. It had been nice to dream, just for a while. To imagine that he might be a valued part of the nobility, even just for a while, as they planned this war that was going to happen. He could imagine him doing some research and perhaps advising the king about some history. And perhaps, just perhaps asking Ned Stark about, no. That door had closed. They'd never allow it now. He wandered down the corridor tiredly. A positive blizzard of ravens had flown off and they had to wait for some to come in before any more could go out. They wouldn't know the truth about the wildfire for weeks though. It took time for ravens to get to and from King's Landing. That said, he knew that Jaime had told the truth. Or at least that he believed that he had told the truth. A closed door brought him to a halt and he looked up and then blinked. Of course. His feet had brought him to the library. Where else? He pushed the door open and wandered in with a sigh before stopping. There were voices to one side. He waddled wearily over and then peered around a bookshelf. As he had thought. Daisy was sitting there with Shireen next to her, both engrossed in some books. He stared at the former sadly. Well. Ned Stark would never agree to any request to marry his cousin now. He sighed slightly but walked towards them anyway. He might as well take the opportunity to wring a few last precious moments out of life. As he approached they both looked up. Hello Tyrion, Daisy said quietly. Shireen was looking for a good book on the Durandons. I want to know a bit more about them, Shireen nodded. As I'm descended from them and I really want to know how I can hear Stormbreaker chime whilst others hear it clank. Tyrion stared at her and then swapped a glance with Daisy, who looked as baffled as he felt, before she asked the obvious question, Shireen, what was that about Stormbreaker? Uncle Robert called father and all his children into the same room. Then he hit Stormbreaker with a hammer and told them all his children that is to write down what they heard. And then the funny thing was funny as in odd, that is, not amusing, was that all his, natural children heard it chime, the same as father and I, whilst all his so-called legal children just heard a clank. Father said that he'll explain it all later, but there's no need, I know what it meant. His children are sort of swapped over. Tyrion closed his eyes for a moment as his heart sank a little further into his boots. Joffrey, well, the boy was a monster, he didn't care what happened to him. But Tommen and Myrcella. When he opened his eyes he caught the gaze of Daisy, who nodded at him sadly. I'm sure that Ned will do his best to make sure that the children will be taken care of, Tyrion. He nodded back. Well. Time to hold his head up and try and show some dignity. I agree, Lady Sherestone. Given the recent circumstances, I realize that House Lannister is not exactly in good standing at the moment, at least in the royal court. There is every chance that I will soon be sent back to Casterly Rock. I would like to thank you for your friendship and your kindness. Daisy and Shireen just stared at him for a long moment, before looking at each other. Daisy, he's being noble, Shireen said after a moment. And silly. Yes, said Daisy in a steely voice, he is. Shireen, is this book enough, or do you need more? The girl looked owlishly at the books, picked up 2 of them, nodded and then trotted off. Daisy watched her go and then folded her hands in her lap and gazed at him seriously. Tyrion, what are you doing? Hoping not to say goodbye to you, he thought. Instead he said, my brother and sister are traitors to the realm. They were found red-handed in their treason. The stink of this will spread far and wide, and I do not think that anyone will. She cut him off with a raised hand. Tyrion, did you help them in that treason? No. Did you know about it? Well, I suspected that they were doing something stupid, but I never dreamt that they were being that stupid. Would you have approved? Never. Did you fight with Robb and Jon at the night fort? Well, yes, or at least I was there when they fought. I threw a knife at a man, I think. Did you fight with them beyond the wall, against whites and others? Yes. Has anyone placed you in a cell? No. Have any of your family, other than your siblings, been placed in a cell or asked to leave? Well, no. I'd forgotten Tyek was here. And Lancel. Haven't even seen either of them. Daisy stood up and walked over to him. You are 10 times cleverer than your brother, you have 1,000 times your sister's heart. She made fun of my name when we met and none of her vileness. You have fought side by side with House Stark, you saved me at the inn from that whoreson. Tyrion, you do not need to leave, or withdraw yourself, or hold yourself apart in any way. Now, I have had a word with Ned and he is expecting you to talk with him at some point. Something stirred in his heart. It was either astonishment or hope, he wasn't sure which one. About what? About you asking Ned for my hand in marriage. There will be a lot to arrange. And with that she kissed him on the cheek. Not sure about the beard. You will need to be taken in hand on a few things. A smile that made his heart stop for an instant came his way and then she swept out. He put his hand to the spot on his cheek where she had kissed him. All of a sudden the world was a different place. Right, he muttered, his thoughts dancing on new heights, I need to go and shout that confession out of Jaime. Cat. She found Ned, naturally, in the Godswood. He was sitting there staring at the heart tree, the fist on the ground at his feet and his face a mystery, lost in the shadow cast by a tree from the setting sun. Are you well, my love? She asked the question quietly and only after looking about the place to make sure that they were alone. It's been a very long day, Ned sighed. And I was just thinking about my father and what I did to avenge him. Him and Brandon. And Lyanna. The cost as well. If what Jaime Lannister said is true, I very nearly joined father in death by wildfire. I heard the news from Lewin, told to him by Robb, she said faintly, her stomach still roiling with horror. Do you believe him? There was a long silence as Ned brooded over that question. Yes, he said eventually. It fits with what I remember of that madman. When I saw him at Harrenhal. I remember how horrifying his appearance was. Those nails, those eyes, his cackles, and his insane shrieks. It fits the facts. Why else would he have appointed that pyromancer to be his hand? She sat down next him, a little more heavily than she had intended. "You might have died." "But I did not," he said, reassuringly. "Come now, Cat, I made it back to you. You and Robb." She thought about things for a moment and then smiled slightly. "To think that you owe your life and that of your men to Jaime Lannister." A slight chuckle erupted from her husband. "I know," he muttered. "The old gods have a sense of humor, so they not." She smiled and leant against him, drawing inspiration from his quiet strength. "What will become of him?" "I don't know." Ned said the words slowly. "He is guilty of treason, and Stannis wants his head on a spike, but he admits that while that is the law, there is a certain amount of difficulty in this case because of Tywin Lannister's importance. We need the Westerlands in this war that is coming. That said, Jaime Lannister must be punished for what he has done. If I was Robert, well, the wall needs men more now than it ever has before." "You would send him to the Night's Watch?" Ned shrugged. "He's a vain, smug, dissembling whoreson, who in that future that will never come to pass might have thrown Bran from the old keep for seeing something that he should not have. But he's also a fine swordsman. I would have him swear his oath on the Fist of Winter here in the Godswood. If he breaks such an oath, then what happened to Bootle will happen to him." She remembered that moment, the crash, the flash of light, and the moment that the wretched man had been hurled backwards, quite dead. She'd known that he was dead almost instantly, feeling it in her heart. "We need to tell him that then." "I." Ned stood and helped her up, before picking up the fist and attaching it to his belt. "There's a lot to be done, even now. Robert will need to see the wall, Tywin Lannister will have to be dealt with." He sighed, offered his arm to her, which she took, linking her own in his, and then escorted her out of the Godswood and across the courtyard. "There's a lot to do, as I said. Arya and Bran have done well though." She was about to smile wryly and tell him about how she had done her best to keep an open mind there, when she heard the sound of hurrying feet. It was Lewin, who was holding up a piece of paper. "My lord, the last raven of the day, brought this. You should read it at once." He handed it over and then stood there panting. Ned opened it and held it up to his eyes in the dying light. "Ah," he said, a bit too calmly for her liking. "Tywin Lannister is headed to Winterfell. He's coming to ascertain the truth of the call." "Well, that should be interesting. How many people is he bringing?" Cat asked, as she thought about dealing with yet more guests. At least the royal party had brought coin with them, and today's hunt had restocked their larders twice over. He did not say. "But knowing Tywin Lannister, there will be a fair few people. I think I should tell his grace at once. He was last seen by the Great Keep, with another log," Lewin pointed out. Ned nodded. "The years have rolled off of him. To see him training with a log, it brought back such memories of growing up." He nodded at Lewin, who pattered off in the direction of the library, and then Ned and Cat walked towards the Great Keep, through the gathering darkness. As they approached it, however, Cat could see that someone had lit candles in the little September that Ned had built for her so many years ago, and where she worshipped the Seven every morning. "Ned, is there someone in the September?" Her husband squinted at it and nodded, looking surprised. "Someone is in there. I wonder who." "Do you think it's the king?" Ned shrugged. "He never was very religious." "Let us check though." As they approached, they could see a figure within it. Cat looked at Ned questioningly. It was Sir Barristan Selmy. The old white cloak was kneeling before the statue of the warrior, looking strained. After a while he looked up and then seemed to sense them both, turning slightly. "Lord and Lady Stark. Your pardon, I felt the need for guidance." "You have no need to apologize, Sir Barristan," Ned rumbled. "I myself have just come from the Godswood. We all need guidance at times. I felt a most particular need for it today." Sir Barristan sighed. "To have witnessed such a betrayal by one of my sworn brothers. And now I have been commanded by His Grace the King to rebuild the Kingsguard. I have a great task in front of me and I cannot fail in this. I fear that the Kingsguard has fallen mightily in recent years, indeed for some time now. The rot started in the time of Aerys Targaryen." "You are too hard on yourself, Sir Barristan," Ned objected. "You are too kind, Lord Stark, but no. We started to fall many years ago, it just took time for the rot to show. I saved the then king at Duskendale, but I soon realized that it might have been better had I failed. Aerys' madness was a stark and terrible one. He looked at Ned and a look of pain crossed his face. I was there, at the Red Keep, when your father and brother died. I remember that terrible day so very vividly. Aerys murdered them both. And I and the other members of the King's Guard who were there. We said nothing. Not a word. I was a coward that day, we all were. We did not want to be added to the flames. I often think of that day. I should have said something, done something, to stop it. But I dared not. His madness was too great by that point, the smallest thing would set him off. And he loved wildfire. That, if nothing else, tells me that he the prisoner was telling the truth about the caches in King's Landing. Sir Gerald Hightower once said that we guarded the king, we did not judge him. He shook his head. No. We should have said something. Counseled him that what he was doing was madness. Then you would have died, Sir Barristan, Ned sighed. He was too mad to hear of anything that went against his wishes. The only way to stop him by then was with the sword. And even then, replacing Aerys would only have meant that Rhaegar would have taken the throne. And I do not know if he might not have gone mad himself. Sir Barristan frowned. I knew him, or at least I thought I did. I once thought that he would make a good king. Now, hearing about this wildfire plot of his father's, I wonder about many things. Why he abducted your sister for one. In the last year of his life he was different. Rhaegar was increasingly obsessed with prophecy. At the end, one specific prophecy. The prophecy of ice and fire. And then, right at the end, the day before he died, he went to the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye in the days before that battle. He went alone, despite my objections. When he came back he was different. Resigned. He said that he had met the Green Man and that he had been told something about his fate. And then he gave me and my sworn brothers at the Trident orders that placed us all away from him at the start of the battle. During the battle I saw him half fighting and half searching. I think that he sought out the then Lord Baratheon. That does not sound like the man I thought I knew. Was he mad or sane at the end? Cat looked at Sir Barristan Selmy carefully. The man looked and sounded strained. Are you well, Sir Barristan? The old man looked at her sadly. I have to restore the King's Guard, my lady. I am not entirely sure how I can do that. How can I remake it so that the King's Guard is not a place to drop creatures like Boros Blount? But at the same time, how can I ensure that we have no Crispin Coles? And how can I find men who are willing to kill their king if their king tries to order the death of an entire city like King's Landing? How is it that men like Jaime Lannister can be both right and wrong? Gods, this is the task for men like Sir Duncan the Tall. And he is long dead. All I have is myself. Gods, no wonder he had sought the guidance of the warrior. Ned must have thought the same thing, because he shook his head. I wish you every success on your quest, Sir Barristan. He glanced at Cat, who caught the message instantly. We will leave you to your devotions, Sir Barristan, she said, nodding respectfully to him. I hope you find the answers that you seek. My thanks, my lady, my lord. I hope that I do too. And with that the old man knelt before the warrior again. Perhaps a prayer to the Father might help as well. Tyrion. He'd been fiddling with old coin the first time he'd tried to visit Jaime, only to hear his brother's confession about Aerys and the wildfire. He'd been so shocked that he had dropped it on the floor, and there it was. He picked it up and peered at it. Old and worn and somehow apt for this place. Jaime was slumped against the bunk. His eyes seemed sunken and unseeing, his hands shook slightly and there was a stain on the knees. There was also a slight smell of vomit in the air and a damp patch on the floor, as if something had been sluiced away. Tyrion looked at him sadly and then slumped against the wall opposite his brother. Oh, Jaime, he said mournfully. What a mess. Jaime looked at him dully. Hello, Tyrion. Found a coin, have you? I had it earlier. Dropped it when I heard your little revelation about the wildfire plot. A lot of ravens have flown on that one. He paused and looked at Jaime. I saw the maester here on the way to see you. There was a raven from the south. Father is coming here. Jaime froze for a moment but then leant back and laughed softly. He hasn't heard yet. Ravens can't get to Casterly Rock and back in a day. Why is he coming? To find out the truth about the call. The call, and what is the truth about the call? That it happened. It explains the dreams. Jaime went very still. Dreams. We have green seers in our family, Jaime. Uncle Jerian has it, his son Illyrian has it. I think that I have a touch of it. I dreamt a dream on my way here to Winterfell. A terrible one. Father had been one of those who didn't send help to the war. And as a result Casterly Rock had fallen. The place we both grew up in was filled with whites, one of which was father. You were dead. Cersei was dead. I was leading the last survivors south, trying to stay ahead of the walking dead. Jaime said nothing, he just stared at Tyrion with eyes that were filled with some undefinable emotion. Then he finally let out a sigh and ran his hands through his hair. Dreams, he muttered the word carefully, an odd tone in his voice. Why is father so important? We need his men, his gold and above all his goodwill and his brains. House Lannister must be seen to support the Night's Watch in this war that is to come. The war you claim is coming. You saw the head of the White. I have seen far worse. Trust me, Jaime, the others are coming for us all. And they bring the dead with them. They are coming. His brother eyed him for a long time, his eyes flitting about his face almost feverishly. You believe this? He repressed the need to take off his boot and hurl it at Jaime's head. Yes, he said very firmly instead. Which is why we need father on our side. Have you become a Northman, brother? He glared at Jaime. I am a man of Westeros, brother. That is how we should all think. There can be no neutrals on this. If the Dornish think that this is another war that they can sit out, then they are fools. Besides, the Dornish are already coming, House Dane is already here. Jaime looked at him again and then sighed and looked away. My severed head on a spike will not enamor father when he sees it. Right. Time to roll the dice. It might not come to that. The spike, that is. There is another option for you. Jaime looked at him, confused. Then his face cleared. The war. You saved King's Landing from Aerys Targaryen, the Mad King. Stark and the Baratheons don't know that yet. Your tale rings true. Selmy thinks it's true. Selmy wants me dead. I'm surprised he hasn't burned my white cloak already and smeared my face with the ashes. Selmy knows we need every man we can get on the wall. Jaime hung his head for a moment. The wall, do you want me dead that badly, brother? Don't be a fool. He shouted the words as he came to his feet. I want you to live for years to come. You are the only friend I have had all my life. But it's the wall and life for as long as you can survive there, or the headsman and death tomorrow. You are the finest fighter House Lannister has seen for many years, you can live in the Night's Watch. Yes, the wall is the place where this war that is coming will be fought. You can fight there, no wasted death here. Jaime just looked at him again, hollow-eyed. Death, or death in a few months or years, in the company of rapists and thieves and murderers. My, what a choice. The Night's Watch is not what is was, Jaime. Volunteers are flocking to it. And every man in it heard the call. Every one of them. Perhaps it was their calling. Perhaps it was the war. But they are fighting for us all. Jaime looked unconvinced, and it was then that Tyrion's temper finally came to the boil. Jaime, do you have any idea what you and our brainless sister have done? House Lannister stands on the brink of ruin. We are all tainted by what the two of you have done. We will not be fully trusted in the matter of marriage for years, decades to come, if that is we survive the war. Do you think that House Lannister will be trusted from now onwards? That other houses will approach us for marriage alliances? No. So we must repair the damage that you have done. Or at least start to. Yes, you are guilty as to the matter of treason. That much is plain, as you were caught red-handed. But you also saved King's Landing. That can be used as a counterbalance. Not much of one, but just enough to alter your fate from the headsman to the wall. And the best thing you can do right now is to confess. His brother stared at him again. Confess. To what? They already have witnesses to what I did. But not for how long you did it for. You need to confess to being the father of the children. Father? I was never a father to them, Jamie spat bitterly. I just slept with her. Semantics. The king needs that confession. He would be willing to send you to the wall for it. Why? Because of father. You know what he's like. He will deny what you have done. He will think that it is a plot. He will drag his heels and think it all an affront to the family name. He will even think that it's a plot by Stannis Baratheon to steal what should rightfully be Joffrey's. The king has already disowned his children. This is the biggest political crisis to strike his reign so far. He needs as much certainty as possible on this. You can give him what he needs to prove to the realm that his children are not his own and that what he has done in divorcing Cersei was the only thing he could have done. Confess. He'll kill me. He could have killed you earlier today. He did not. Jamie looked at him for a very long time and then he leant back and passed a slightly shaking hand over his eyes as he seemed to think very hard. Do you think it might work? I will speak until I am blue in the face, until I make them agree to it. Jamie stared at him for another long moment. And then his face seemed to set. I will sign a confession. Tyrion let out a sigh. Thank you, Jamie. But there is a condition. Ah. What is it? I want a trial by combat. The words rang around his head but failed to make the least bit of sense. What? I want a trial by combat. For what? You are already guilty of treason and you are signing a confession. For the death of Aerys Targaryen. Jamie looked at him with eyes that were far away again. I'm done drifting. Father pushed me one way, Aerys pushed me another, and then Cersei did what she did. I'm done with drifting. I don't want to be called Kingslayer on the wall. I want a trial by combat for what I did to save King's Landing. He stared at Jamie, who had an odd look on his face. Jamie, that makes not the least bit of sense. But that's my condition. If you lose, you'll be dead. Lose? Me? And Jamie smirked, like in the old days. Oh, I'll win. I'm Sir Jamie Lannister. He gazed at his brother and then he finally nodded. I'll tell the king. Even though it was madness. Ned. It was a quiet feast. Not somber, just subdued, as if everyone knew just what kind of a cloud was hanging over Robert's head. Oddly enough, however, Robert was not busy brooding, getting drunk or snarling at people. Instead, he and Stannis were having a very intent conversation on the far side of the high table with Gia Mormont, who was telling them both, in a great deal of detail, about just what life on the wall had been like before the call. Judging from the taut expression on his face, Robert was feeling more than a bit guilty. Not that he should, the Night's Watch had been neglected for centuries. That said, given by the way that he was talking, and the notes that Stannis was taking, that neglect on the part of the Iron Throne had now ended. To one side stood Sir Barristan Selmy, who still looked as if he had a great deal on his mind. Ned sighed as he ate his own food, some venison that the castles has hunted down whilst he had still been riding south from the wall. Cat was next to him, but Robb, Jon and Theon were away to one side, sitting at a table and having a quiet but intense conversation about a piece of paper that lay in front of Theon. He's choosing his new name, Cat said, seeming to read his mind. He's making his decision. Wants to talk to the king tomorrow about it. Ned, the lad's nervous. Can't say I blame him, Ned muttered. Not an easy thing to do, disowning your own father. You do know that he wishes that you were his father, don't you? Cat asked shrewdly. I know, he sighed. I can't imagine what it must have been like to grow up with Balon Bloody Greyjoy as a father. The man's an idiot. The discussion on the table with Robb, Jon and Theon was petering out a little, as the latter jabbed at a spot on the paper and then set his chin a little, before looking at the king, who was still talking to Stannis and Gia. A decision had indeed been made. He nodded to himself, and then reached out and snatched the last piece of bread on the table just ahead of Rickon, who had been eyeing it surreptitiously for some time and talking to his direwolf about it in what he had obviously thought was a low voice. As his youngest son looked at him in shock, he stuck his tongue out at him, and then grinned, tousled his hair and gave it to him, delighting in the giggle that the boy uttered. It was only then that he saw that Tyrion Lannister had entered the room from one side and was walking towards him, his face set. Ah! What had he discussed with his honourless brother? Lord Stark, Tyrion said formally as he walked up, I need a word with his grace and yourself. Ned nodded, wiped the sides of his mouth carefully and then stood up and walked over to Robert, who greeted him with raised eyebrows. What's up, Ned? Ned looked at Tyrion, who stepped forwards, cleared his throat, stared at his feet, scowled at the ceiling and then finally looked at his king. Your Grace, my brother has made his decision. Robert nodded seriously. And what has he decided? That he will confess his crimes. Confess to what he did. Ned stared at him, along with Robert, Stannis, Gia and Selmy. A full confession. Yes, Lord Stark, Tyrion said in a low voice. He will take the black. Gia made a slight face, but then schooled his features quickly. A new brother, he muttered. Well, he's skilled at fighting. He'll be needed. He has stated a condition though, Tyrion said with a wince. He wants a trial by combat for the killing of Aerys Targaryen. Everyone within earshot stopped what they were doing and stared at him, and as the whispers spread the silence that followed grew. It was Robert who broke the silence, after cleaning out both ears with his forefingers and then staring at Tyrion. You what? Tyrion lifted his chin a little and then repeated, he wants a trial by combat for the killing of Aerys Targaryen. Why? Tyrion shrugged his shoulders. When he joins the Night's Watch he does not want to be called Kingslayer anymore. There was a pause. Then Robert cleared his throat again. Is he mad? No, Your Grace. He smirked at me, said that he'd win any such trial by combat and added that he really did not want to be known as the Kingslayer anymore. Robert leant back in his chair and just stared at Tyrion Lannister for a very long moment. And then he finally responded, very well. Tell your brother that I accept his condition. He will have a trial by combat. Tyrion nodded somberly and then bowed formally and walked out. As he left, Robert stroked his chin. Smirked, did he? Selmy stepped forwards. I fear that the man might be a bit unbalanced, Your Grace. Robert nodded, but Ned could tell that his mind was elsewhere. He had to admit that so was his own. Who on earth could they find to fight to defend Aerys Targaryen, the whoreson who had murdered his father and his brother? Right then Robert rumbled. The Kingslayer wants to fight someone. Fair enough. He'll fight me. A shocked silence fell, and then everyone seemed to surge to their feet in protest. Your Grace. Robert. Are you mad, brother? Robert rose and raised a hand, before looking at Sir Barristan Selmy. The Red Keep. The Lord Commander of the King's Guard opened his mouth, and then froze. Oh, he muttered in a slightly stunned voice. Of course. He paused, as an expression that combined shock, chagrin and then reluctant acceptance stole over his face. Are you sure, Your Grace? I am, Robert stated as he set his chin. Stormbreaker will break him. Jorah. He sat in the godswood until well after the sun had gone down, the little piece of paper in his hand. He felt, well, he didn't know how he felt. There was numbness there. Anger. Shame. A kind of guilt as well. And then there was the other feeling. The relief. Was that what it was? But, he had let her down, he knew it. He should have been there for her. So many memories. So much love. So much bitterness. So very many words. Angry words. Sad words. Bitter words. Feet pattered on leaves and he looked up to see Lyra walking towards him, holding a lantern, a worried look on her face. Jorah. Is this where you have been for so long? I've been here, he muttered, before wiping at his eyes. There was a message from White Harbor. She came to a halt next to him, obviously uncertain about what to do next. What was the message? Whatever it was, it seems to have hit you hard. He looked down at the message, which was hidden in darkness. Despite that, he knew every word on it. Word came from Lies. She went very still. Word of her. He said tiredly. Word of her. Lyra bowed her head. She is coming home then. I have read of the High Towers. They are a very old family. The call must have been strong with her. He stared at her. It must have been for her. A tear trickled down her face, illuminated by the lantern as she drew herself up. Very well, I shall. But he interrupted her. Linus is dead. She stood there, her eyes widening, and then she closed her mouth with an almost audible snap. Dead. Jorah passed the message over to her. She tried to leave lies in order to heed the call. The man she was with, a merchant lord, or something like that, called Trigger or Molin, objected. He paused. They killed each other. There was a pause as she stared at the piece of paper and then at him and then at the paper and finally back at him. There was a look in her eyes that combined all kinds of emotions, ones that he suspected matched his own. Finally she said, "So, you are no longer married?" "No," he said quietly. "I am not. I mourn what I had, but that flame burnt out years ago. Truth be told, I don't know what I now feel about her. She is gone." There was a long moment of silence and then she nodded. "I understand. You have a lot to think about. I will leave you to your gods." She turned and walked away and then he stepped forwards and placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her in her tracks. "Do not leave me, I beg of you." He heard her swallow and then turned to meet his gaze. "I will never leave you." "I know," he muttered as he took her hand and lifted it to his lips. "Please do not. You have stayed with me through all of this, since I heard the call. You have come with me to lands that are nothing like anything you have ever seen before. You have seen things that I have not, supported me as no one else could. I don't know how to thank you." She smiled at him, tears in her eyes. "I just did what I could, my love." He reached out and brushed the tears away. "I need to say something to you, Lyra. I love you." He gulped. Yes, it had always been coming to this, in his dreams at least. A kind of fog overtook his thoughts. "I am now free to. I mean that I could ask you, would you consider," damn it, he was getting this all wrong, his words awry, the intent blunted. Was this too soon? No, it was not, but... "Lyra, I will marry you." She looked at him, more tears in her eyes, and she felt his own pricking. "That is what you were asking, was it not?" "It was," he choked out. "It was." He looked her in the eyes. "Marry me." Her eyes crinkled as she smiled at him. "Yes, my love. I would love nothing more." And then she was in his arms and her lips on his, and all of a sudden that hollow place in his heart was no more. Tyrion. He did not sleep well that night. Poderick had returned from the kitchen with a plate of food and the news that an unnamed someone had volunteered at Fight Jaime and that the trial by combat would happen the next morning. His mind had promptly wandered about, trying not to think about it and utterly failing. Although his bed was comfortable and he usually never had any trouble nodding off, that night sleep did not come easily at all. He tossed, turned, punched his pillows into all kinds of shapes, stared at the ceiling, the walls, the pillows and even once at the mattress. And then when, finally, sleep came, so did the dreams. He dreamt that his brother fought a giant wolf, no, a giant on its mammoth, no, a stag, no, the mountain. He saw his brother lose both the battle and his life, and then another battle which he won but lost a hand, no, a hand and an eye. He talked with Jaime after his brother had won his trial by combat despite the sword that his opponent had stuck into him and left, the blood pooling on the ground as Jaime grinned and spoke of how he had prevailed. The nightmares followed. Jaime dead, his head on a spike. Jaime on the wall, huddled in furs, a beard shrouding his face as he stared bitterly north of the wall. That was important for some reason, he didn't know why, but Jaime was trying to tell him something and he just couldn't hear him because of a strange skittering noise. And then there was the worst one. Jaime as a shambling lifeless white, eyes blue, throat torn out, lurching about in a blood-spattered room that he realized was the Great Hall at Casterly Rock. To one side another sat in what looked like a throne of ice, with what remained of father acting as a footstool. And as Tyrion looked around the room in horror, seeing too many men and women that he knew standing motionless but also lifeless, every one of them with blue eyes, the other seemed to notice him. Its eyes narrowed as it looked at him and then it was standing and striding across the room towards him, not that he could do a thing, His feet seemed to be frozen in place as he tried to run, tried to scream, tried to. He came awake with a half scream, scattering pillows all over the place, before staring around the room blearily. Well, that had been unpleasant. He ran a shaking hand over his chin, decided that he needed a bath and a shave, and then gave up on sleep and waddled off to the room to one side that had that wonderful bath with the hot water. By the time he was clean, shaved and dressed, the sun had risen and he walked out to the courtyard outside, where men were setting up tables on two sides. Uncle Geryon was standing by one of the tables, along with Illyrian and Lancel, inspecting a suit of armor and some weapons, swords to be precise. He walked over and as Uncle Geryon saw him he nodded. "Uncle. What's all this?" "Jaime's armor and weapons. His armor needs a polish and his swords need to be sharpened. I've got a cloak for him as well." Geryon looked at him sharply. "Tyrion, is Jaime mad? Why is he doing this?" It was a good question and all three Lannisters were looking at him. He sighed and spread his hands. "I know not. It made no sense last night and it makes little enough sense this morning. Personally speaking, I think that something in my brother has broken, uncle. I think that perhaps he will be careless with his life today." Lancel looked shocked, but Illyrian just swapped a troubled gaze with his father. It was then that Tyrion noticed something. Brightraw was not at Uncle Geryon's hip. He was about to ask why when he spotted movement at the first keep. Jaime was striding towards him, escorted by the castles. His brother had wet hair and had had a shave. Despite the swagger in his stride, there was a haunted look in his eyes. "Do we know who he will fight yet?" Tyrion asked quizzically. Everyone stared at him. "Do you not know? It's the talk of Winterfell," Uncle Geryon muttered. "Wait, you were only briefly in the Great Hall last night." "I ate in my room and my Squire Pod is not exactly known for his gossiping abilities." His heart fell into his boots. "Who is he fighting?" Uncle Geryon opened his mouth but then his eyes flickered to one side. "Him," he muttered with a twitch of the chin. Tyrion looked to one side and then his jaw dropped. The Demon of the Trident was striding into the courtyard, Robert Baratheon in full armor, holding a shield with the Baratheon stag on it in one hand and his new helmet in the other. Behind him walked Sir Barristan Selmy, holding Stormbreaker. To be honest, he was still stunned at the transformation that had come over the king. He was used to thinking of Robert Baratheon as a fat, red-faced drunk who liked food and whores in equal measure and who lived off past glories. That had been before the call. The man had somehow been rejuvenated by that summoning to Winterfell, the fat and laziness sloughing off to reveal the demon. The man who had taken on Rhaegar Targaryen single-handed at the Trident and slaughtered him. Jaime, who had just joined them at the table, froze. What is this? Why is he in his armor? His throat was suddenly very dry. I have just heard, he said eventually, that he is your opponent. The king. Jaime looked stunned and angry. I can't fight the king. How can he fight for Aerys Targaryen? This is madness. And treason as well. Jaime's voice had been steadily rising as he spoke and he all but bellowed half of it. The king tilted his head to one side and smiled, before taking a step forwards. Treason never stopped you before, did it, Kingslayer? Why should it now? He gestured at the crown on his head. Is it this? It's just a piece of metal. He took off the crown and gave it to Stannis Baratheon, who had arrived next to Ned Stark. You're fighting for your honor, Kingslayer. I'm not fighting for Aerys. I'm fighting you because someone has to and because you need some humility beaten into you before you leave for the wall. And with that he turned and strode back to the other table, where he spoke with Selmy, Ned Stark and his brother in a low voice. Jaime stared at the king and then shrugged. Lancel, my armor, he muttered as he held his arms up in the air so that his breastplate and backplate could be buckled onto him. Illyrian assisted his cousin as Geryon and Tyrion watched, the eldest Lannister with an intent look on his face. As the rest of the armor was buckled onto him, Jaime seemed to relax a little, enough to smirk at his uncle a little. If you were wielding Brightraw, uncle, I might ask you for a lend of it. But Uncle Geryon glared at him. Jaime, this is no time for levity. Do you think that this is funny? We will be dealing with the impact of what you and Cersei have done for years to come. No, you cannot wield Brightraw. You are not worthy of it. His brother all but reeled at this, the blood flooding into his cheeks for a moment, before he went as pale as a ghost. A silence fell as the last pieces were buckled onto him and he took up the shield with the Lannister crest on. Uncle Geryon stepped forwards again, this time with a Lannister tabard in his hands. You've worn white for a long time, he said quietly. Soon you'll wear black. For this fight though you'll wear the colors of your family. Wear them with pride. And with that he placed the tabard over Jaime's armor and secured it. Are you ashamed of me, uncle? Jaime asked in a low voice. Uncle Geryon looked at him. I spoke harshly, nephew. We'll talk later. Jaime nodded, took up his helmet and placed it on his head, and then took his sword from Lancel. Only then did he nod at Tyrion and then the others, before walking into the middle of the courtyard. Quite a crowd had assembled by now, a surprisingly quiet crowd, but as the king strode forwards to meet Jaime they cheered. Robert Baratheon was holding Stormbreaker in one hand and Tyrion wondered just what the sword was made from. Should we not have your maester declare this a trial by combat, your grace? Jaime asked lightly. The king just laughed at that. This is the North, Kingslayer. Ned, what do you normally do up here, under the eyes of the old gods? We just get on with it, your grace, Ned Stark rumbled, words that made many in the crowd laugh. If you're going to fight, then fight. That'll do me, the king replied, before settling into a fighting stance, shield raised, Stormbreaker held at the ready. Jaime seemed to sigh but then copied his opponent. It was Jaime who started the fight. He feinted a dart right but then went left, not that it fooled the king, who tracked his every move and who parried Jaime's blow with Stormbreaker. They broke apart and then circled each other, before the king attacked with a wicked slashing blow that Jaime barely deflected with his shield. He counterattacked, but the king used his own shield to withstand his attack. It was only then that Tyrion realized that the courtyard was silent as everyone watched the fight. He could see Daisy standing with Catelyn Stark on a balcony to one side, along with her children and Domeric Bolton. The king launched another attack, one that Jaime parried with his own sword before striking back, but there was something wrong. The noise seemed discordant. Jaime's eyes flickered to his sword, but then Stormbreaker hammered down again and again. Jaime parried the first but on the second his sword shattered into a dozen pieces. Jaime was caught totally off balance by this and went sprawling, whilst the king just staggered a little, whilst a moan of astonishment rose in the courtyard from the crowd. The pieces of what should have been good steel skittered on the flagstones and one slid to a halt next to Tyrion's foot. He picked it up. The inside of the blade was rusty. Which was impossible. His brother scrabbled to his feet and then braced himself for a blow that did not come. The king just stood there. I don't think that Stormbreaker likes you, Kingslayer, he said. Go get your other sword then. Lancel held out Jaime's spare sword and Jaime took it. His eyes were very wide all of a sudden, and as Tyrion caught his eye he realized that his brother was stunned. But then he seemed to recover, because he turned and then launched an attack that forced the king onto his back foot for a moment, a high overhand strike that was caught on the yellow and black shield and then a strike with the shield itself towards the king's face. It never got there and instead Stormbreaker hammered into the top of the shield and actually sheared away a part of the iron frame that edged it, before the king slammed into Jaime and sent him backwards. Somehow Jaime kept his balance, but then barely parried another slash from Stormbreaker, and then another. The king was using a combination of brute force and genuine skill and Jaime seemed to be rattled. He barely dodged a blow that clanged against his helmet, before taking a step backwards and then trying his own version of an overhead blow. It was met by Stormbreaker and once again Jaime's sword shattered on the impact, pieces flying everywhere. Once again Jaime went clattering to the ground and as he passed the king Stormbreaker flickered down, as quick as lightning and the flat of the blade slapped against the backplate of Jaime's armor. When Jaime came back to his feet he swayed a little and then looked about in desperation. Sword, someone give me a sword. There was a muttering in the crowd, before Lancel drew his own sword and darted forwards to hand it over to him. Jaime hefted it for a moment and then stared at his shield. There was brown along its edge and it looked as it was warping in some way. A hoarse shout heralded the arrival of the king's next attack, a blow that Jaime just about absorbed on his shield, but the next one sent him staggering back again. He raised his sword and tried to counter-attack, but the king met each blow with almost contemptuous ease and then struck at Jaime's head again, this time sending him reeling from a blow to his helmet. Tyrion stared at this. Something was very wrong with Jaime's shield as well as his helmet. The former looked increasingly warped whilst the other seemed to be brown in places and lurching a bit as Jaime moved. Oh, and there was the brown mark on the back plate. Was that rust? Things went totally to the seven hells in the next few moments. The king attacked again, and once again Jaime's sword just shattered. At about the same time that his helmet fell off his head, the metal corroded in places. Jaime reeled back, blood on his face from a shard of his sword, losing his balance completely and then staggering to one knee. His cheek had been sliced open and his eyes were very wide now. Sword. It was not a call, it was a cry of despair. Someone give me a sword. A white-faced red cloak drew his sword and slid it across the flagstones at Jaime, who took it with a nod, before standing and then launching himself at the king. They came together with a clash of armor, shield on shield, but the Lannister shield was looking the worse for wear by now, warped and broken, and the king stepped back and smashed it to one side before hammering down three great blows that Jaime barely parried. The fourth blow did the inevitable. Jaime's latest sword shattered and he flew backwards to slam into the ground. There was a new wound to his forehead, and when he shook his head in what must have been an effort to clear it, the blood spattered on the flagstones next to him. There was now utter despair on his face, but still he called out, "Sword! Someone give me a sword!" The courtyard was utterly silent now. Jaime staggered to his feet, the blood running down his face. His shield was a wreck and his breastplate looked askew, as if it was barely holding in place. The whole thing seemed to be covered on rust now. "Oh, Stormbreaker really doesn't like you," the king muttered. "Come on, someone give him a sword." Another pale-faced Lannister guardsman handed over his sword with shaking hands. Not that it mattered much. Jaime threw his shield away and then rushed at the king, who met his first blow with his shield and then parried the second with ease with Stormbreaker, before attacking again. One blow, another, and then once again Jaime's sword shattered, sending him to his knees before the flat of Stormbreaker came down onto Jaime's breastplate. He slammed into the flagstones, looked about with a combination of despair and bewilderment, and then his breastplate seemed to just cave in, fissures of red rust appearing all over the place. "Sword!" Jaime all but sobbed. "Someone give me a sword!" No one said a word in that ghastly silence, or even moved. "No," said King Robert as he loomed over the prostrate figure of Jaime. "You're done." Jaime stared up at him. "Kill me," he said eventually. "Kill me?" The king eyed Jaime from head to toe, before curling a lip. "No. Gods, you can't even defend yourself, and I'll not kill such a man, despite what you've done. No. You'll go to the wall. You'll defend us all. And no more smirking." He smiled a bitter smile. "We need you, Kingslayer. And I keep my word. You'll go to the wall. Learn from my example." And then he walked away from him. Chapter 35. Chapter text. Domeric. Robert Arryn trotted surefoot around the carefully laid out course. The lad was a fast learner and surefoot was a perfect fit for him. The little pony was reacting to his nudges of the foot with aplomb and an immediate understanding of what his rider wanted. Hopefully those two would go far together, as they grew up together. He sighed for a moment. The future. What lay ahead? "Young Lord Robert looks as if he's learning fast," said a very familiar voice behind him, and he turned with a smile. Lord Redfort was standing there, watching the heir to the Vale with a careful look on his face. Then he smiled at Domeric. "You've done well, lad." He bowed respectfully and then clasped Lord Redfort's proffered forearm with a grin. "Thank you, my lord. It's good to see you again." "And you, Domeric," came the reply, along with a hand on his shoulder. "Congratulations on your impending marriage. She's a very pretty girl." He flushed a little but then nodded. "Thank you, my lord. She's a remarkable girl." Lord Redfort nodded and then looked back to young Robert, who was still riding with a look of deep concentration on his face. "Lord Arryn would be proud of him. I'll write to him of all you have taught him. Knowing Jon Arryn, you can count on his gratitude. Young Lord Robert has a good bearing in that saddle." "The second thing I taught him," Domeric said wryly. "The first thing was the same thing you taught me. The health of your horse is paramount. Hooves, feet, coat, tail. The older man nodded at him and then slapped his shoulder. Well said. He looked at Domeric carefully. Have you told your betrothed of your plan? Domeric nodded seriously. I have. And her thoughts? He reached into his pocket and pulled out the precious piece of cloth that never left his presence, before handing it over. Lord Redfort peered at it curiously and then raised his eyebrows as he spread it across the back of his hand before chuckling slightly. A favor of the new banner you plan for House Bolton. Domeric smiled a little and then nodded as he looked at the red-on-white diagonal on a black background on the piece of cloth. A break from the past, Domeric explained. Red instead of pink as well. Lord Redfort looked at him quizzically and he sighed. I cannot ask Sansa to marry me and take up that old banner. Not given the fact that the original flayed man on it was a King of Winter. A Stark. It would be an insult to her. The Lord of the Red Fort looked at him gravely for a long moment and then nodded gravely. Who made it? Sansa. Her needlework is most impressive. As is her direwolf. I imagine that by the time we marry Lady will be quite large. I wonder what my father will say. Does he know? No, he took the favor and folded it very carefully, before putting it away. But I think he suspects. And after the death of my half-brother, it's me or my cousins, the Boltons, who were with the Company of the Rose. They don't hold to the old ways. I know, I've talked with them. Lord Redfort pulled a face. I heard about your half-brother. A bad business. That familiar sense of sadness enveloped him. He hated me. I never suspected. We had never met, but he hated me nevertheless, just for existing. How could he have such hate? From what I've heard, Domeric, he was a lunatic. Lord Redfort looked back at Robert Arryn. I'll write to Lord Arryn today. He'll be grateful, as I said. The Vale the Red Fort will support the future Lord of the Dread Fort. Domeric clasped hands with the man he had been fostered to and then he sobered. Winter is coming. We have a storm to survive first. Aye, but we are as strong as stone, Lord Redfort replied. And our minds are sharp. He looked at Robert Arryn and Surefoot, still determinedly trotting. There's much to do. Theon. He waited outside the room, sitting on a bench. He felt nervous. But then he'd been nervous ever since Robert Baratheon had loomed into sight in that gatehouse, that huge form that he had first seen at Pike all those many years ago. The demon of the Trident had devastated the Iron Islands and become the demon of Pike, at least in his dreams and nightmares in those weeks after the fall of his family home. But then that's why he was here, now. His father had started a war that he had no hope, not the slightest hope of winning. His father, in one of oh so very many miscalculations, had ruined the lives of so many on the Iron Islands. Including his. Especially in that future that would never come to pass. The door opened and Sir Barristan Selmy stepped out. He looked at Theon gravely, who repressed the need to swallow convulsively and instead stood up. His Grace will see you now, the old Kingsguard said quietly. He has a suspicion about what you wish to talk about with him. Theon nodded and followed the older man into the room. There he saw the King of Westeros, clad only in breeches and rather damp about the torso as he toweled himself off briskly. His Grace was powerfully built, heavily muscled about the shoulders and with sagging skin about his stomach. He looked like a man who had once been fat but who had lost weight in some places whilst gaining muscle in others, and that his body was still coping with the changes. To one side sat Stannis Baratheon, who was reading Raven messages with a scowl. Theon Greyjoy, Robert Baratheon rumbled as he pulled a shirt on. You wished to see me. Ned said that you'd approach me. And he thought he knew why. So what do you want? He stood there, staring at the king for a long moment. Your Grace, he said hoarsely, I wish your permission to change my name. I no longer wish to be a Greyjoy. The king sat on the end of a table and stared at him shrewdly. As Ned thought. Very well, why? He took a deep breath. My family's legacy, no, father's legacy is one of foolish decisions. Madness. He ruined the Iron Islands when he declared independence from the Iron Throne and then attacked Lannisport. He thought that your hold on the Iron Throne was tenuous. He was wrong. And my brothers and so many others paid the price for his mistake. He holds to the old way. The iron price. The drowned god. And I do not. Stannis Baratheon swapped a keen glance with his brother before staring at him. You deny what your father believes. I do. Theon nodded. I deny it. Especially the drowned god. I worship the old gods now. And that's why I can't be a Greyjoy. I can't lead the Iron Islands if I don't worship he struggled for the right words. A mad creature that claims to be a god. The other two men stared at him. The drowned god is mad, the king asked, carefully. How do you know this? And so he told them both. About the dreams. About the shades of his brothers, and where they had tried to take him. About the thing on the throne of bones, on the Isle of Bones. About the mast. And the voice. By the time he finished talking about it all, he was hoarse and red-eyed, and the king and his brother were both staring at him as if they'd seen a ghost. Perhaps, based on his face, they had. Let me see that pendant, lad, the king rumbled as he walked up to him, and Theon tucked the weirwood pendant into view. He always wore it, day and night. Just in case the dreams ever happened again. A gift from the old gods, eh? Yes, your grace, he muttered. And a worshipper of the old gods can't rule Pike. Not that I want to. I'm of the north now. I have a direwolf. I want to stand beside House Stark. It means giving up your birthright, Stannis Baratheon grated. Are you sure about that? Truly. He wanted to laugh bitterly, but held it back. I care nothing for my birthright. Or my father. I have been a hostage here at Winterfell for years now, but the Starks have given me far more affection than my birth father ever did. Balon Greyjoy, he paused for a long moment, bitter words on his lips. My father never showed me much affection. He only liked my brothers once they were old enough to reave. And I'm told that he's even more bitter now than he was before. If I return to Pike tomorrow, then he'll scorn me as a Greenlander. Especially because I have missed my direwolf. He'd probably order his murder. The king didn't say a word, but just stared at him with his head tilted to one side. As he assessed him. Gods, he said eventually, I never thought about what it would be like to be raised by that sour streak of vinegar, Balon bloody Greyjoy. You poor bugger. He searched for the right words but ended up just shrugging. It's what I was used to at the time, your grace. When I arrived here at Winterfell, even though I knew that I was a hostage, it was different. Better. The two Baratheons swapped another look before the king sighed mightily and then returned to the desk. Bloody hells, he muttered. Good for Ned. A large set of fingers drummed on the table for a moment. All right then. So what do you want to be called? Theon cleared his throat. I thought, Greymist. House Greymist. I want to find a holdfast somewhere here in the north and be a sworn banner to House Stark. I want to build something here, your grace. Something worthwhile. Something far better than what my father would have me do. I want to be of the north. The corpses of the men and women of Winterfell that had haunted his dreams, the shadow of that future that would never now come to pass, danced before his eyes for a moment, and then he blinked as it all vanished. Something of that must have flashed across his face, because the two Baratheons both looked at him carefully and then swapped another look with each other. Giving you permission to change your name will not please your father much, the king said eventually. Not that I give a fuck about that, as your father is an idiot. But you are his heir and this is not something to be done lightly, lad. There will be implications. And perhaps even complications. I know, your grace, he sighed. And I am sorry for it. But I do not do this lightly. Because I worship the old gods, if I ever returned to Pike and tried to rule, well, I'd die in my sleep inside a week. Or fall from one of the towers. By accident, of course. The Ironborn would not accept you. Stannis asked the question carefully. Worshippers of the drowned god are that jealous of their god? I doubt that many would admit that their god is a mad twisted thing, Theon muttered, his mind going back to those gibbering screams and the smell on that Isle of Bones. You'd be surprised, Theon Greyjoy, Lord Stannis replied as he looked down at the messages. It seems that the war on the Iron Islands has spread. Victorian Greyjoy tried to take Harlaw some weeks ago. He lost. Your uncle, the reader, beat him and is in open revolt against your father. And it's said that there are supporters of the old gods amongst his supporters. Oh, and it's said that your sister fights with Lord Harlaw. He straightened a little. Asher always had been the clever one. Then she can rule the Iron Islands. With my Uncle Roderick's support. They'd be far better than my father. They're needed there. I'm needed here. There was a rasping noise as the king rubbed his chin with one calloused hand. I'll think about it, he said eventually, before raising his other hand as Theon opened his mouth to protest. This is a decision that will affect many, as I said. Given the situation on the Iron Islands, the news that you've renounced your father's name might have some impact or none. I need to talk to a few people. Think it over, just to be on the safe side. There's no need to rush. Come back in 2 days. Don't get me wrong, lad. If you want to stay in the north, I'll not stop you. I think better of you for saying that you want to be a banner to Ned and fight the others. But I need to talk to a few people. The door was opened behind him by Sir Barristan Selmy, and Theon bowed to the king and then strode out. Mist had somehow found out where he was and was sitting there waiting by the bench outside. He smiled and ruffled the fur between the direwolf's ears. It seems I'll have to wait a bit longer, Mist. But that's all right. We're staying in the north. The direwolf yipped and then bounded down the corridor ahead of him. He had some plans to make. Greyjoy or Greymist, he was of the north now. And there was nothing that his damn father could do about it. Robb. He was in the Godswood, staring at the carved face on the heart tree and wondering, yet again, who had created it. Man. Green man. Child of the forest. How old was it? He sighed and then looked at the pool, watching how a blood-red leaf was drifting on it, blown by the wind. To one side sat Grey Wind, who was watching him carefully. I thought I'd find you here, said a voice on the other side of the pool, and he looked over to see Jon approaching, Ghost padding at his side. Best place to sit and think in Winterfell. He sat down next to him and a companionable silence fell. The two direwolves sniffed at each other and then both sprawled out next to them and seemed to fall asleep. I wasn't expecting to feel sorry for that bloody man, Robb said eventually. Odd, that. Jon frowned slightly but then nodded. I know what you mean. The moment I laid eyes on Jaime Lannister I hated him. Him and his swagger and his smirk. And knowing what he did in that future that you saw. He pushed Bran out of that window, spat Jon. I can't forgive something like that. Another silence fell. That said, seeing him like that, begging on the floor to be killed after being humiliated like that. I felt sorry for him. First I delighted in seeing him beaten like that, but in the end. Robb agreed, reluctantly. I felt the same way. Delight at first and then, pity. Odd, that. I remember seeing him in a cage after I smashed him in battle, but he was never as broken as he was at the end of that fight. He never stood a chance, did he? No, Jon muttered. Stormbreaker broke him. It judged him. And it found him wanting. Yet another silence fell as the two sat there and stared at the heart tree and the pool respectively, whilst the direwolves started to snore slightly. Robb looked at Grey Wind and smiled slightly. Has Arya talked to you about warging? She has. Make any sense to you? A little. The thing is though that she's young and believes things more easily than we older siblings. We still think that some things are impossible. She didn't. Which is why she can walk and Bran is starting and we still think that some things aren't possible. He looked at his brother. That made sense. Don't sound so surprised. Good point. He paused. In that other future. I would have dreams sometimes. About seeing the world through the eyes of a direwolf. And just before I was murdered, Grey Wind was very restless. Almost as if he knew something. Jon shivered. That other future of yours, thank the gods it will never happen now. The thought of Ion born here in Winterfell. He nodded. Father talked to Hojan Reed. He had a dream, or something like that. He remembered being in the crypts, escaping Winterfell when they came with Bran and Rickon. It might be that Theon didn't kill them in that other future. He smiled slightly. I never told you that one of the last things I did before that wedding at the Twins was to make you my heir, did I? Eyebrows raised, Jon just stared at him. Why did you do that? I thought Bran was dead. I thought Rickon was dead. Sansa was a prisoner of the Lannisters and Arya was just missing. We never knew what had happened to her. She just vanished from King's Landing when father was executed. He said the last words as quietly as he could. They were alone there, but the words were still horrifying. As was the thought. The memory of the moment that he heard the news of what had happened before the Great September of Baelor still made his blood run cold. Jon shook his head in astonishment. Your mother must have been furious. She coped. I had no choice at that time. And then I died. The silence that followed was the longest one of all. I'm glad you came back and warned us, Jon said eventually. Thank the old gods. And we know what's important now. The real war. He paused and then smirked a little. We've both seen the wall. How do you think the Kingslayer will cope with life there? Jon smirked back. Badly. Ned. He found Robert in the crypts the next morning. He'd left his old friend alone after his fight with the Kingslayer, as he could tell just by looking at him that Robert had some demons to exorcise. Apparently he'd staggered around the training yard with that log until he almost collapsed, eaten an entire roast chicken with his bare hands, drunk a yard of ale and then vanished off to his bed. And now he was here, looking at Lyanna's tomb again. Somehow he registered Ned's arrival without even looking at him. Morning, Ned. Robert. He joined his king at the tomb. You've been quiet. I've been thinking. A ghost of a smile came and went. Not used to it. And then he went back to staring at the tomb. Just before Ned could ask what he was thinking about, Robert finally said, I keep dreaming about her, Ned. It's the oddest thing. She's in a forest of weirwood trees, in the snow, and she's trying to tell me something, but then there's this noise and something keeps pulling her away. Last night I dreamt I almost caught her, I almost grabbed her, but then, just a dream. But it's such a real dream. I'll confess that the more the years passed, the more her face blurred in my memory. This time last year I could barely remember what she looked like. Now, I could describe every inch of her face. Robert had mentioned that dream before, but the way that he was talking about it made Ned pause for thought. Do you think it might be more than a dream? This made Robert pause himself. I don't know, Ned. I just feel different. He eyed the hulking king to one side. He was holding Stormbreaker against his chest, where it was almost hidden in the darkness. Robert, that sword rusted everything metal that it touched on Jaime Lannister. What else can it do? Robert looked down at it slowly and then shrugged. I don't know, Ned. I knew that it might break the Kingslayer's sword that happened in the Red Keep months ago. But I didn't know what else it might do. When his armor, helm and shield fell apart, well, I was flabbergasted. Tried not to show it though. As for what else it might do, I don't know. You said that the Fist of Winter killed Bootle Stone dead. What else can that do? It was a good question, and all Ned could do in reply was shrug. Lewin's combing through the archives with my cousin Daisy. And Sir Barristan's looking through the archives left by the Selmys. They were the swordbearers for the Durandons. He paused, his jaw working as uncertainty crossed his face for a long moment. I need to know if bearing this sword has changed me, Ned. I'm thinking about a lot of things. Like what? Like how I've been a piss-poor king so far. Don't deny it, Ned. Not to me. We've been through too much together. I have been a bloody awful king. Jon ruled the 7 kingdoms as hand whilst I just drank and ate and hoard my way through my life. You know what? I never realized what it would be like to be king. When you all knelt and proclaimed me king, I thought, well, I did know what I thought. Perhaps that if we won it would be like being Lord of Storm's End, only on a greater scale. I never dreamt what it would really be like. Never really thought about it. And then, when we won and I lost at the same time, when she was taken from me, I never really stepped into the role, did I? You led us to victory against Balon Greyjoy. But that was war, Ned. And I like war. War's easy compared to the piddling boredom of peace, of running a kingdom full of the proud and the pompous and the stupid. Is it? Robert, you remember that meeting when you hammered out the strategy for winning the war? You and me in that room with Stannis, Tywin Lannister, Paxter Redwyne and Mace Bloody Tyrell. You dominated that room. It was war, Ned. No, it was politics too. Never forget that, Robert. We crushed those Ironborn thanks to you. Another pause fell. Then Robert finally smiled slightly. You're too kind, Ned. But still. I've been a bloody awful king, even then. And since I've held Stormbreaker, I've had these thoughts. Small ones at first. Doubts. But now, greater ones. This is my birthright, but I need to be better, Ned. But I don't know how to be. Lead us in this war, Robert, Ned urged. You are our king. There's so much to do. You know what's at stake. There's nothing that's more important than this war that's coming. If you think that you should be better, then learn. Just don't turn your face to wall and give up. He couldn't bring himself to tell his old friend that yes, he was right. He could be a better king. Robert set his jaw a little and then looked back up into the face of Lyanna's statue. Gods, she would have been 10 times the queen that treacherous whore was. She cared about people. She didn't have her nose in the air, thinking that she was better than anyone. He paused for a moment and then he opened his shirt a little and pulled out a little pouch that hung around his neck on a leather cord. I've never shown this to anyone else, Ned. The man who made it for me died in the siege of Storm's End. Frowning, Ned took the proffered pouch, tugged it open and then upended it. A golden locket with a long, fine, gold chain slid out of it. The face of the locket was split in half, with a stark direwolf on one side and a Baratheon stag on the other. It's beautiful, Robert. This was for Lyanna. It was. I was going to give it to her on our wedding day. There's a lever on the side. Open it. There was a lever and it was a fiddly one to operate, but it opened eventually. When it did, his heart seemed to stop for a moment. Inside was a little etching of a very familiar symbol. A laughing tree. There was a pause as he struggled to speak. You knew then that it was her. I knew. I worked it out. The night of the laughing tree cinched his saddle the same way that she did. Held the reins the same way. The length of the stirrups. I'm a good horseman, Ned. I notice how good others are. I knew it was her by the end of that day. I knew why she did it too, to punish those fools who beat young Howland Reed. She did what was right. Robert sighed gustily and smiled sadly. If she had been at my side from the start as queen, gods, she would have pushed me to do the right thing. She wouldn't have let me drift, or lose myself in food and wine and other things. As I said, I was going to give her that locket on our wedding day and then laugh with her about what she did at Harrenhal and tell her how proud I was of her. Ned nodded mournfully and handed the locket back to Robert. But unexpectedly Robert did not return the locket to the pouch. I couldn't give it to her in life, but I can in death. Ned, with your permission. Another nod, and then Ned watched as Robert carefully hung the locket around the neck of the statue, before smiling wistfully. It looks good on her, does it not? Ned muttered, the old grief rising like a black tide in his throat for an instant. It does. Robert wiped his eyes for a moment and then turned. Come on then. Back to your solar. We've got to wait for a lot of news, plus my former good father. His face should be a picture when he hears about just what his bloody children have been up to. All of them. Asher. Well, that's a surprise. Asher looked at the man next to her. Old Gregor's words had been flat and frankly rather stunned. She didn't blame him. She was a bit stunned herself. I thought Moat Cailin was supposed to be a ruin. She peered at the fortress. Once there had been 3 semi-derelict towers. Now there were 5, with a 6th being built. The curtain wall had been rebuilt in most places and there was a wooden keep rising up. That's not a ruin. Where'd they get the fucking stone? Robb asked. Old Gregor laughed shortly. Don't be a fool, lad. It was here all the time. It takes time and coin to build a castle. You need to dig the foundations and ship in the dressed stone. But they don't have to do either here. The foundations are already dug and there's all the stone they need from the fallen walls and towers. They just needed the men to dig it up, clean it off and then start mortaring it all together. To a plan, Of course. Someone must have told them where the floor went. She nodded and then led them down the causeway towards the fortress on their freshly purchased horses. They'd bought them at the first inn they had found, from a very suspicious innkeeper who had made them pay more than they probably should have. She didn't mind, this was too urgent. They'd been lucky with the weather. A stiff wind from the south had gotten them into Blazewater Bay in record time, before they'd benefited from the winds from the west that often blew that far north that had taken them as far up the Fever River as the Black Wind could take them. Robb had hinted that he could double back, knife the innkeeper and get their money back, but she'd told the fool not to bother. She had had that odd scratchy feeling between her shoulder blades that meant that they were being watched by some unseen person or persons ever since they'd landed, which was why she'd told the rest of the crew to head back to High Harlaw as quickly as possible. She'd mentioned it quietly to old Gregor, who had looked about the trees around them and then sniffed mightily. "Crannog men," he'd whispered. "And more of them than us. They're on alert." "How can you tell?" "My mother was from the Neck. A merchant. Taught me the signs." And then he'd shut up, eyeing an inoffensive tussock of grass that seemed to have absolutely nothing behind it but air. It certainly explained why 6 guards in armor rode out to meet them, wearing the colors of House Reed, all Crannog men. "Ironborn do not normally travel by horse in the Neck," the leading man said suspiciously. "Who are you and what is your business at Moat Cailin?" "Asher Greyjoy, daughter to Balon Greyjoy, on urgent business for Lord Harlaw in Winterfell," Asher replied. "Very urgent business there. We are traveling to see the king in Winterfell." The man who had questioned them stared and then stirred a little in his saddle. "Torren Reed, cousin to Lord Howland Reed," he said, nodding slightly. "Very well, given your task and how small your group is, you may pass. Word was passed of your arrival. Had you ordered the murder of that innkeeper who sold you the horses, Lady Asher, you would be dead by now, by the way. Pass on." They rode on, Robb's face flaming with a combination of anger, embarrassment and fear, eyeing the towers of the fortress as they rode past it. As old Gregor had noticed, everywhere there were men working on stones, digging them out, cleaning them, chiseling some, breaking up others, whilst yet more were mortared into place at the stern direction of a couple of men who seemed to be builders. "This place couldn't be taken easily before, and it's impregnable now," old Gregor muttered to her. "From the south or from the north? They're getting ready for a war, Asher. And look at how hard they're working. The call was strong here." She nodded reluctantly. The place made her feel uneasy. The war in the Iron Islands was important, it was why she was here, but this place, this was where the real war was. She could feel it. The pull that had been nagging at her for months now was diminished here. Not gone, never that, but lessened. The others seemed to feel it as well, especially old Gregor, who was looking about the place with eyes that seemed to be full of emotion. "I should have fucking listened to Mima," she heard him mutter at one point. "I should have listened to her. She said I was touched by the trees." But then he noticed her sharp look and shut up. They rode on, leaving the fortress behind them, and all the time the sense of being watched never left her, that tickle between the shoulder blades. The causeway was in good repair, with the bogs all around it and then the sea in sight to the east. A nasty shore that, a bad place to be caught by a change in the wind. As for the bogs, they smelt and looked as if they could suck down anyone on a horse. But there were paths here and there, because she could see a figure on a horse in the middle of one bog. A man in a green cloak. As they passed him, he reached back and pulled at the back of his cloak, so that a hood was raised onto his head. A hood with antlers on it. It took a moment to realize that old Gregor was no longer riding at her side, but had reined in sharply and was staring at the man in the bog, his face as white as a bleached sail. "What's wrong?" Asher called, feeling worry as she tugged on the reins. The old sailor looked as if he had taken an arrow to the heart. The others stopped as well, but after a long moment old Gregor swallowed and kicked his horse's ribs, making it break into a trot. "A green man," he muttered as he reached her. "It's a green man. Out of the bloody legends. They've left the Isle." He looked at her and there was something in his eyes that made her feel faint herself. "The call is true. The others are coming. The Stark calls for aid. We are fucking well needed." And so they galloped north. Brindon. They rode hard up the King's Road after that. Interesting time at the Twins. The green man had been silent after their time there, quiet and almost bitter. He had come close to asking why, but then had remembered what the older man had said about Waldorf's father being ashamed of him. The memories must have been thick for the man who had once been Sir Duncan the Tall. There were tales of his travels with the young Egon V, of how they had crisscrossed much of the Seven Kingdoms when the king had been nothing more than a young prince who was far down in the succession. He looked at the road ahead and then found his thoughts skittering around Brienne of Tarth. She was down to earth, did not babble, and she could fight. Gods, could she fight? They'd been attacked by one group of bandits a week before and it had been brutally one-sided. The even Star of Tarth had done a superb job with his daughter. He repressed a sigh. He had finally found a woman who intrigued him and who he could imagine being at his side. But he was older than her. A lot older. The gods seemed to like piling irony on his head. Well. Enough of that. The road stretched ahead and they were now in the neck. The Green Man had sent a rider to make contact with the Reeds, who were somewhere to their northwest with their mysterious stronghold of Greywater Watch. He didn't like to think of a stronghold that floated. Then he paused and sniffed at the air. Something was different. Not wrong, but different. He looked at Brian, who was also sniffing at the air, and then at the Green Man who was no longer to one side. All the Green Men had stopped their horses dead in the tracks and were staring north. He tugged on the reins and came to a halt himself, before swapping a baffled look with Brian, who shrugged at him. After a long moment the Green Man seemed to shake himself a little and then looked around. Well, he said eventually, Rickon Stark's mission has finally been completed, as was foretold. Or perhaps it might be better to say, as it was hoped. This made so sense. Rickon Stark. The only living man of that name is my great-nephew, who is just a small boy. A smile came and went on the face of the Green Man. Your pardon, Sir Brynden. The Rickon Stark I was referring to was born centuries ago. He seemed to take note of the confusion on their faces. It's a long story, but one that I will tell you when we stop at midday. For the meantime let me just say that a great blow has been struck in our favor. That said, the enemy will know it and I do not know how he will react. We need to ride harder. As they rode at a faster pace along the road he found himself thinking very hard and very quickly about the Stark family tree. A Rickon Stark who had been born centuries ago. What did that mean? Who were they talking about? Tyrion. His mind felt fuzzy. Gods, he was tired, and when he was tired then he had trouble thinking clearly. The fuzziness just took over, making it hard to consider all the things that he needed to think about. He ran his hands over his face. Well, things could be worse. Jaime could be dead. After a moment he pulled a slight face. Physically and mentally Jaime was still alive. In terms of his spirit however, something was gone from his brother's eyes, some spark or fire. He'd watched the previous day as Maester Lewin had first cleaned and then sewn closed the wound on Jaime's cheek, which had been a deep one. I'm afraid that the scar will be with you for the rest of your life, Sir Jaime, the old Maester had confessed. Even with fine thread and small stitches. Jaime had not said a word, he just nodded in response when he could. And since then Jaime had just continued to withdraw into himself. Tyrion knew why he had not just been beaten, he had been humiliated. Many of the Lannister guards were still talking about it, the judgment of the gods, some called it, without really saying which gods. In a way it was helpful. His worst nightmare had been some loyalist idiot trying to free Jaime and Cersei by inciting the others to do something stupid. Fortunately, that did not look as if it was going to happen, especially with Uncle Geryon ruling over them with a rod of iron, or more like the voice of a lord. As for Cersei, no, he had no concerns over her. She'd always influenced Jaime, she'd always been a creature of hate and whim. She had been stripped of what she wanted most, power. She was no longer queen, and some might say that that alone was punishment enough. He was undecided, but then her fate was not in his hands. No one knew what was going to happen to her. Jaime on the other hand would be sent to the Wall and the Night's Watch as soon as news came through of the truth about the wildfire. He was sure that Jaime had told the truth, though it wasn't the kind of thing that his dear but unimaginative brother would ever make up. No, a raven would come with confirmation and then Jaime would ride for the Wall. Never to return. His mind swooped like a drunk swallow for an instant and he clenched his fists for a moment and did his best to concentrate. Damn it, he was tired. Not enough sleep, too much to think about, too much to worry over. In the past when he'd worked himself into this kind of state, then the answer tended to be to retire to a high-end brothel, the kind with silk sheets and very clean girls, and then book a room, a wine rack and a couple of very nubile female companions. That option was closed now, as Ned Stark would look at such behavior with extreme disfavor. Damn it. No. He sighed wearily and then looked at the report that he had been writing for Father. It was extensive. He just hoped that Father would read it and not throw it away with a snarl and a growled question as to just what had he done to prevent the catastrophe that had just hit House Lannister. Gods, Father was going to be furious when he arrived. This was the kind of scandal that not even Father could stamp out. The ravens were flying, with their tale of incest and treason and bastard children, and dishonor on a monumental scale. Worse people would do the one thing that Father really hated. They would laugh at House Lannister. Make fun of them. Perhaps, oh the horror, make up a mocking song about the queen who loved her brother so much that. A chuckle left his lips and he shook his head a little. Wool gathering. No, this would never do. He had too much to do, although a nap might help. His head felt heavy, along with his eyelids. Gods, no, there was too much to think about. All the things that had happened over the past month, the wall, the night fort, the battles, the others, the whites, the prophecies, the rides, the bruises. Sleep was overcoming him and he really wanted to sleep now. Just a nap. Just something to stop the thoughts from swirling about, like pieces in a puzzle, but he didn't know what the shape of it was. And then he came bolt upright in his chair, as awake as it was possible to get. Robb Stark is the boy who died and fell through time. He didn't shout the words, but he said them forcibly, before looking around his room slightly wildly. Then he frowned. Damn it, I should have worked that out weeks ago. Sam. This place was an absolute paradise. Books. A sea of books. Books as far as the eye could see. Stacks of them, shelves of them, all over the place, on the tables, on the floor in some places, as people studied at their desks. And they weren't dusty. Which still surprised him, but then there was a small army of acolytes who seemed to be always brushing things out of the doors. He peered at the pile of books around him, ignored the gurgle of his stomach yet again and plunged back into the hunt. He was close, he hoped. Maybe today he would find what he was looking for. The books were all about the earliest carvings and other paintings found in the Seven Kingdoms, especially the Reach. They were not the ones that he'd thought he'd need at the beginning of his time at the Citadel. The first books he'd read had been about Garth Greenhand, but he was such a murky creature, surrounded by legend and myth. He had soon concentrated on everything that the Citadel had about the earliest history of the Reach and the physical evidence that remained of it. And that had meant the carvings. The runes of the first men, the cave paintings by the children of the forest, the first records, everything. Of course a lot of it made no sense whatsoever. Many maesters had written many books with their interpretations of how some of the runes could be read and few of them agreed on anything, so he'd looked at the original runes himself. The problem was that runes were not the best way to express certain concepts, some of which were ones that could not be expressed in modern terms, and he suspected that there was just no way to properly translate those. Which worried him. For instance, there were the runes that told of some kind of burial of something that might not have been entirely dead. Whatever that was about, it seemed important. Then there were the runes about a hand of the dog. But the ones that really interested him was the very oldest carvings. They had been found in a cave near Highgarden and they told of some kind of pact between the first men and the children of the forest. He peered at the book that had the best drawings of the runes and frowned. They were old, very old. And very peculiar. The dialect, the language. Perhaps it was the original language of the children. He pulled a slight face. He had always had a fondness for the tales that surrounded the children of the forest. They had been here first long before the first men. They had carved the faces on the heart trees. And, they might have smashed the arm of dawn. How? Well, that was a mystery, and a very interesting one at that, but magic had to be involved. And now they were gone. Oh, there were legends about them. A sighting here, little more than a rumor, surely, a whisper there. There were those persistent mutterings about the north and even the Isle of Faces, but no confirmed sightings, not for centuries. And that made him sad. They had been a part of the land for thousands of years and now they were gone. He'd always hoped that perhaps, somewhere, in a deep part of the forests of the Reach, there might be a small group clinging on. Somewhere. He'd once made the mistake of mentioning that hope to father. It had earned him a clip about the back of the head and a snarl not to be such a fool. There had been no such blows after the call. Or the discovery of other bane. The look on father's face when that hidden door had opened with a creak and a groan that had made him wish for some oil, and the moment that they had opened that chest to see the spear. Well, that made up for so many things. So very many things. A door opened to one side and he looked over to see as Archmaester Ibros walked in. Lord Samwell, he said, somewhat distractedly, before walking over to look at the books that Sam was reading. Ah. Interesting. How goes your research? I might have an idea about these runes, Archmaester, he said carefully. What if they are in the language of the children of the forest? The older man stared at him for a long moment and then sat down with a grunt and a grimace. Puristan had the same thought. Sadly, we do not have any idea of what that language was. He pulled a slight face of his own. I'm not so sure. These cave paintings, there's these runes on them. But some are older than the first men, so they have to be by the children of the forest. In which case the first men might have learned runes from them, see. In which case there might be runes that we can't read because we don't know the language. But, then there's these runes that were carved in that cave near the Isle of Faces, that Archmaester Peroniston wrote about centuries ago. They had two sets of runes, one under the other. And we know that they refer to the pact between the first men and the children of the forest. Now, I have heard that there's another set of twin carvings in the high tower. If I am right, if the second set of runes is in the language of the children of the forest, then that might be enough to give us the beginnings of a start to work out the language that they spoke. Ibros peered at him and then at the books and then at the ceiling and then back at the books and finally back at him again. Interesting, he said eventually. Tell Puristan at once about this idea of yours. Then he paused. It's a shame that you're the heir to Horn Hill, my boy, you have a very scholarly mind indeed. You'd make a fine maester. If father had been there he would have been horrified by those words, but to Sam they were high praise indeed and he nodded with a touch of embarrassment. Where is Archmaester Puristan? Ibros's brows came down into a skull. Like so many others, he's puzzling over that message of Lewin's from Winterfell. Sam's eyebrows went up. What message? The old Archmaester looked at him again as a pair of bony fingers tapped the table. How strong was the call at Horn Hill? He remembered the moment that voice had boomed in his ear and had near made him whittle himself. Very strong, he muttered hoarsely, and something of what he felt must have shown on his face, because Ibros nodded. How do you think it was sent? That was a good point and he had to admit that he didn't know, so he shrugged. I don't know, Archmaester. According to Lewin, the Maester at Winterfell and who has sent in a long and detailed letter about events there, it was sent via an artifact in Winterfell. Two to be precise. A stone called the Hearthstone and a bowl that has no name, just a rune. Those two simple things sent out the call that made everyone who heard it look to the north. It has to be magic. There was a certain twist to his mouth at that last word, one that made him curious and cautious. Is there a problem with it being magic? Ibros let out a sigh that seemed to come from so far deep inside him that it might have originated in his boots. Magic, a strange ephemeral word. It intrigues and irritates in equal measure. He waved a hand in the air. Lord Samwell, the citadel was created to keep the light of knowledge alive in these and other, darker, times. We are lantern-bearers of knowledge. And it's hard to carry a lantern for magic, because it's unpredictable, unstable, hard to describe let alone to quantify. It ebbs and flows, waxes and wanes according to no discernible rules that anyone has yet been able to ascertain. It is, in short, annoying. Many here in the citadel ignore it. But this call and the gate under the high tower cannot be ignored. Somehow an even deeper sigh emerged from the Archmaester. Marwyn wants to write a letter to Lord Stark, demanding that this pair of artifacts that sent out the call be brought to the citadel and studied, to be returned at some other, unstated, time. As he is Marwyn, and is a rude, uncouth, intemperate man, the other Archmaesters will do everything short of sitting on him to stop him from writing such a letter, as he would do little more than annoy the Warden of the North. Sam thought about Marwyn, and his tongue, and paled a little. Yes, that wouldn't be a good idea. There was a scuffling noise and then a head peered around the door. Ibros. There you are. Puristan's looking for you. Ibros stood with a grunt. Well, that's a coincidence. We're looking for him. Young Lord Samwell here has a theory that Puristan needs to hear. The other Maester waved his hands in the air. It'll have to wait. Lord Tyrell is in the city, Lord Mace Tyrell, and there is some kind of trouble at the High Tower. Willers. They started down the Rosa Road again before dawn, in that eerie half-light that gave them just enough to see the path ahead to Old Town. They'd stayed in yet another small holdfast, the guests of a rather stunned minor lord who had been torn between fretting at the lack of hospitality that he had been forced to offer and being happy that they had chosen his hold to stay that night. They were a small party, just 10 guards, along with Garland and Laura's. His youngest brother had been worrying him of late, due to his attitude, but Laura seemed to have picked up on his increasing urgency as they rode down that road. There was a reason for that. With every mile that passed his unease increased. He had the feeling that something was terribly, terribly, wrong in the world somewhere, and as the sun rose in the sky the closer they got to Old Town the more that feeling increased. As the walls of Old Town appeared on the horizon, and the shapes of the High Tower and the citadel beyond, he took a deep breath and hoped that the ravens that he had sent ahead had gotten there. He had sent some very specific instructions to the authorities of the city. To his relief, as they approached the Rosa Road gate, a group of horsemen rode out to meet them, some in the livery of the High Tower. To his relief he recognized the man who led them. Uncle. Sir Gunthor Hightower smiled and nodded at him. Willers, or should I say Lord Willers? It's good to see you, nephew. All of you. He smiled and was about to ask the question that was on the tip of his tongue when his uncle said words that made his heart sink. Your Lord Father is in the city. He arrived some hours ago. Damn. Father had made good time. He sighed and sagged in the saddle a little. Where is he, Uncle Gunthor? In the starry September, was the grim reply. Willers, your grandfather is very angry about this. Thank the gods you're here. We've heard how you have been taking the reins of the Reach from your father. He has no right meddling in this matter. And yet he is here, Willers said through gritted teeth. Father is the Lord Paramount of the Reach, Willers Laura's muttered. He was still more than a little sullen about Willers's decision to break with Father's ambitious and to Willers' ludicrous plans. It is his right. No, nephew, barked Uncle Gunthor, not in this case. The gate below the High Tower is the responsibility of the High Towers. It is our duty to guard it. Willers thought about the fact that it would have been a good idea to tell a few people about that duty, but bit his tongue. Then he paused. Uncle, did the Gardener Kings know about it? Of course. Then Uncle Gunthor wilted a little. But the Tyrells did not. Damn it. It could not be helped. I must see grandfather at once. I have to beat father to the High Tower. If he is already at the Starry September, then there is no time to lose. Uncle Gunthor nodded. Follow me. He heeled his horse around and then galloped for the gate, with Willers and the others following. Down the streets they clattered, sliding and slowly here and there on the cobblestones, until they reached a larger road that had had a lot of wood chips laid down. My idea, Uncle Gunthor shouted. I thought that you might need to get to the High Tower in a hurry. By the time that they reached the nearest jetty, where a boat manned by oarsmen was waiting, all in High Tower colors, Willers's feeling that something was terribly wrong with the world was redoubled. As he dismounted, he pulled other bane out of its sheath and slung it over his shoulder by its strap. But as he sat down in the stern of the boat, with Garth, Laura's and Uncle Gunthor around him, he could see that they were now in a race that they were doomed to lose. A small flotilla of boats were already on the way to the High Tower from the other side of the Honeywine, and one was flying the flag of the Reach. To the High Tower, stretch out. As fast as you can. Willers said urgently, and the men pushed off and then obeyed orders. The oars dipped on one side of the boat to align it with the current, and then they were off, the oars flashing up and down at the barked commands of the grizzled little man at the tiller. The boat was fast, the oarsmen were good, but there was too much of a lead on the part of those other ships. They made it to the main jetty of the high tower first. Willers scowled a bit, but there was nothing to be done. 2 silver stags for every man if you get us there as fast as you can row. The men cheered, and then they redoubled their efforts, grunting as the oars hit the water and then pulling as if their very lives depended on it. The man at the tiller stepped up his shouted command of stroke. Stroke. Stroke, and the boat sped through the waves. By the time that they moored at the high tower's small harbour, the men were panting at the oars, and he pulled out a pouch of silver stags and handed them all 2 stags as promised. "My thanks," he said, and then jumped onto the jetty, his brothers and uncle behind him. Up ahead he could see a group of men at the main gates to the high tower, and some were very familiar. Father was there, next to Septon Alliston, a man in very white robes that seemed to have something silver faintly visible on it. And then there was Grandfather. Lytton Hightower was much as Willers remembered him, if with more white in his hair, but he could tell at once that his grandfather was furious. He was standing there, red-faced, speaking intently and jabbing with a bony forefinger at Father and the Septon. Father looked more than a bit abashed, but the Septon of the Starry September looked like a man who was angry himself but trying to hide it. Behind Grandfather stood Septon Noy, a dignified man that Willers had always liked, whilst behind the Septon were those stars that had been sewn into that robe. There were a pair of rather large Septons who looked as if they had been chosen for the size of their fists rather than their piety. "This is the High Tower, Goodson, and the matter of what lies beneath our feet is the business of House Hightower," Grandfather said furiously, with another jab of the finger at Father. "This is not the business of the Starry September, nor of Highgarden." Lord Hightower Septon Alliston replied as his nostrils flared, "You have a blasphemous and dread object at the base of the high tower that has reduced many of your men to abject terror. It is, from all accounts, a thing of evil that must be cleansed." Willers narrowed his eyes as he walked up to the group. The Septon of the Starry September was a man who liked to stress words in a way that got up his nose. He'd never liked the man. "Grandfather, Father, Septon Alliston." His words caused various reactions. Grandfather smiled at him, Septon Alliston scowled a little, and Father jumped a little, flushed, and then looked both guilty and annoyed. "I heard heated voices on my way here. What is going on? Willers, what are you?" He cut Father off with a nod to Grandfather. "Mother alerted me to the letter from the Starry September asking for help about this gate. Apparently the high towers have been guarding it for centuries at the very least. More like thousands of years," Willers' grandfather said carefully. "Your mother told you about it?" Willers nodded somberly, which seemed to reassure Grandfather whilst puzzling Father. The Septon on the other hand came very close to curling a lip and then rounded on Grandfather. "Lord Hightower, whatever this thing in the high tower is, it must be sanctified in the light of the 7. All of Old Town is now talking about it. People are terrified of it. I insist on be allowed to cleanse it." On the word insist the 2 Septons shifted slightly forwards and then stopped dead in their tracks when a bristling Grandfather laid a hand on the hilt of his sword and then glared at them both. "Insist, is it? You insist at the high tower, do you? You?" The Septon paled a little as he seemed to realize that he had crossed a line, but then Grandfather's snarl faded a little. "Very well. Down you go. I'll allow you to try. I will watch you try." And with that he nodded to a pale-faced guard. "Take the Septon down. Lord Tyrell, please join me as I cleanse this object," the Septon said after a slightly surprised pause, before sweeping off towards the high tower, Septons in tow and followed by Father and his own men, some of whom looked rather uncomfortable. As for Father, he was starting to look like a man who had made a mistake, especially when he passed Grandfather, who eyed him grimly and then muttered that he would see him in his solar afterwards. As he followed, Grandfather had a muttered word with Septon Noy, who had been looking at the Septon of the Starry September with something very close to open scorn, and who then nodded and followed the main group. Grandfather gestured at Willers and the others to wait a moment and then led them into the high tower as well, hanging well back from the others. "My thanks for coming, Willers," he muttered. "Your support could be important. I knew that people were worried, but, fool as I am, I never suspected that this idiot would use their worry to do this." The Septon. He's been looking at raising the profile of the Starry September. There have been whispers of the faith militant here, and some of the whispers have been leading to Old Town. I will support you in all that you decide here, Grandfather." Grandfather nodded in thanks as they started down a long set of stairs. The taller of the septons behind that idiot in white. He has ties to the faith militant. I am heartily glad he came today. I will have him watched until he goes mad with nerves. As for your father, I thought that he was hunting. He was Willa's side. It seems that he too is trying to raise his profile a little. Then he chose the wrong course, Grandfather replied as they started down new and equally long staircase. A pity. He normally is cleverer than this. I remember the wisdom of his siege of Storm's End. He preserved his options by doing very little. His eyebrows rose for a moment. Yes, he'd always wondered about that. My discovery of the statue of Garth Greenhand and then the Talis' own discovery of Otherbane, changed father. I have placed him in the shade. Grandfather looked at the spear at his back with an upraised eyebrow. I am proud of you, Willers. They had reached a new staircase, one with black stone, and it was then that Willers stiffened a little. He had the sudden feeling of imminent dread. Grandfather placed a hand on his shoulder as they walked down into the base of the high tower. You feel it then? What is it? The gate. And we are not even there yet. Grandfather Loras said uncertainly from behind them. What is the gate? No one knows, Grandfather said simply. The Citadel is researching the history of the high tower, but no one knows. As they reached the bottom of the staircase he paused and looked at them all. Be wary when you are here in Old Town. I do not think that it is a coincidence that the Septon decided to insist on this visit at a time when the call is roiling Old Town so much. It was strong here. Garland asked. Your Uncle Baylor has left for the Shadow Tower, leading a small fleet of the best that the High Tower and Old Town can offer the North and the Wall. Knights, men-at-arms, builders, carpenters, farmers, loggers, hunters, cooks. Answering the call. There was a gate ahead of them, guarded by pale and sweaty guards, and the others had paused there. The Septons from the Starry September all looked at his grandfather with narrowed eyes at the mention of the call. Pagan superstitions, the tallest of the supporters, should they really be acolytes? Sneered, before grandfather's angry face made him swallow and step back. Open the gate, grandfather snapped at the guards, who leapt to obey him. And you are relived. The guards bowed and then all but ran from the room. Willers wondered why, and then he looked through the gates into the room inside and paled. There was a green and glowing mockery of a gate at the end. It was huge. And it filled him with dread. It filled everyone with dread, based on the look on the faces of the others. Everyone except for grandfather, Uncle Gunthor and Septon Noi, who both set their jaws and looked at the damn thing with resolution. They all walked of in some cases shuffled into the room. Willers stared at the thing. There were runes carved into it and there was also a noise like. Is there something on the other side of that thing? We do not know, grandfather sighed. But it seems prudent not to allow whatever it is access. A silence fell, a silence broken only by the faint boom boom of whatever it was beyond the gate. Loras was very pale, as was Garland. After a long moment Septon Alliston seemed to rally a little. He quavered. A heretical blasphemy of the first men. We do not know who made it, or what it does. Grandfather snapped. Do not be a fool, man. There is no congregation here for you to bluster to. The Septon glared at him but then pulled out a multicolored crystal, which he held up in the air. Brothers, he said to his attendants, attend me. I will cleanse this dread object with the power of the seven who are one. And with that he started to intone a prayer to the seven whilst stepping forwards almost ceremonially. This should be interesting, grandfather said as he watched. The closer to that gate you get, the more fear you feel. Willers took a step closer to the gate himself and then swallowed. Yes, the sense of dread did indeed increase. Then he frowned. Grandfather, what is that wooden marker on the floor for? That marks the closest you can get to the damn thing before you void yourself these days. A year ago you could walk up to it and touch it with no more than a vague sense of unease. Now the closer you get the more you want to piss yourself with fear. The Septons seemed to hear him and then pick up the pace a little as they walked slowly towards the gate. The Septon of the Starry September was still praying rather theatrically, his voice booming in the room. But then Willers noticed something. As they got closer to the gate the higher the Septon's voice seemed to be getting. And the prayer was getting faster, some of the words starting to bump into each other. As they got to within 6 feet of the wooden marker, the prayer was in danger of becoming a gabble. All three of them were pale and white-faced, with sweat starting to pour down their faces as their eyes started to take on a slightly wild look. Another step. And another. The hands that held the crystal were shaking, opening now, and the prayer was almost incoherent. Another step. And another. Almost to the wooden marker. The prayer was now just a random jumble of words. And then the taller of the acolytes stopped dead in his tracks, his head twitching violently. There was a sudden spatter of something liquid, and then he turned on his heel and ran for the doors, a look of utter terror on his face, slipping and sliding on the foulness that was dribbling down his legs. "Follow him and keep him safe," Grandfather bellowed. "And bring mops and water for the floor." Willers paid the flight of the man no mind. He was staring at the remaining 2 septons. Both were trying to shuffle forwards, their heads twitching. The septon of the Starry September rallied for a moment, because all of a sudden a few coherent words emerged from his mouth. Another step, beyond the marker. Another, and suddenly Grandfather had a hand on his shoulder and was squeezing almost painfully. Another step took the 2 men forwards. And then the other acolyte seemed to bend in the middle and then sink to his knees, sobbing at first and then letting out a long wail as he collapsed bonelessly in a heap and clawed for a moment at his head, before he seemed to shake like a leaf, his head thudding against the floor until the blood spattered everywhere. Willers took a horrified step forwards, but then Grandfather pulled him back. The septon of the Starry September was still upright. Another step, and then the crystal fell from his hands and smashed into 1,000 pieces on the floor. The septon reeled, his impetus taking him forwards, and then he screamed and clawed at his face with his hands. He was making horrible, horrific noises as something spattered on the floor, and then even more noises that seemed indistinct, as if the man was chewing off his own tongue. And then he stiffened like a board and fell face forwards onto the flagstones with an audible crunch of something or something breaking. That noise broke the spell on the room. Screams went up from various guards. Willers darted forwards and then reeled back as fear rippled through him like a black wave. Garland and Laura's also moved forwards and then back. As Willers swallowed and tried to regain his nerve, someone else moved forwards. Father did not stride, he ran towards the septon, his face set in a look of the utmost resolution. He did not waver, he did not seem to even think about what he was doing, he just ran. As he reached the wooden market though he reeled for a moment, but then he pressed on, his hands over his ears. What was he hearing? As he reached the motionless form of the prone acolyte, Father seemed to stumble and went down onto his knees, but then he reached out with violently trembling hands, grabbed the leg of the man and pulled him with a strength that surprised Willers. The septon slid backwards, past the wooden marker, and that seemed to snap Grandfather and Septon Noi out of their paralysis enough to run forwards themselves and pull the motionless man back to safety. Father turned to Septon Alliston and then reached out again. Just short. He leant forwards again and then he screamed and slammed his hands over his ears again, before collapsing and shaking. "Father!" Willers shouted and tried to dart forwards again, only for the fear to roil through him again. He snarled at his own weakness and then reached back to shove Otherbane into a more comfortable position, and then as his fingers met the shaft the fear vanished like a wave receding. He froze in shock and then he pulled the weapon off his back. No fear. What was this? No time to think about this. He ran forwards himself, ignoring the cries of fear and warning from the others. He reached Father and pulled him up. Father's face was drawn with horror, but he was alive, if palsied. Willers pulled him back towards safety, making sure that he never let go of Otherbane, back to where Grandfather and the others could grab Father, who pulled him even further back. "Is he all right?" Laura's asked. "He saved that other septon." "What about the septon of the Starry September?" Willers turned back and walked back to the damn fool who had caused this disaster, and then he paused. The pounding noise had stopped. And then someone wailed in horror. The bloody man was starting to stand jerkily. He was alive. And then the world seemed to pause and stand still for a long moment as the septon of the Starry September turned his head in a way that no living man should have, as if his backbone was made of jelly. His eyes were gone, blooded holes in his face above a smashed nose and shattered teeth. And yet, something seemed to glitter, like wet and malformed eyes, deep in those blooded sockets just for an instant. The mouth of the septon gobbled something before the head wobbled back towards the gate, and then the body of the septon took a shaking step towards the glowing artifact. What in the seven hells is that thing? Someone shouted the words that Willers was thinking. The walking corpse took another step forwards, and then the gate seemed to shake so hard that dust fell from it. Boom came the noise from it, boom, boom. Willers gripped Other Bane in both hands as he looked at the gate, and then he blanched as something seemed to press against the stone that made up the face of it, as if solid stone had suddenly become like cloth. The shape of a hand appeared on it for an instant, skeletal with long nails. The thing that had been Septon Alliston gobbled something again and then stepped forwards again, blooded hands reaching towards the gate. Willers, kill that thing! Grandfather shouted. He swallowed and then strode towards the shambling figure. Other Bane was in his hands, and as he approached the septon it seemed to be shining in a strange way. Something was pressing on his forehead and he blinked a bit. And then he drove the head of Other Bane into the back of the septon. The blooded figure screamed, and then a face appeared in the gate. A face out of a nightmare. Cadaverous and yet with something that writhed under its chin. The face seemed to look at him, and then it made a noise that was a cross between a noise and a scream. Willers pulled spear back and then struck again, deeper than before. The thing that had been the septon of the Starry September screamed even louder, and then it collapsed bonelessly before the threshold of the gate. Willers pulled the ancient weapon free, his brain filled with fire as he looked at the face in the gate. Go back to the abyss that you were thrown into. He bellowed the words without thinking, the words appearing in his head from somewhere deep within him that he had never known even existed. You belong with the dead. The face in the gate screamed in a way that he could not describe, and then he grasped Other Bane in both hands and drove into the head of the septon. The head burst apart into a puddle of foulness, as if the man had rotted to pieces at a gallop. Something shuddered below his feet, and then the face in the gate vanished. The gate flickered for a moment but still kept glowing. Willers sighed, looked down at the rotting remains that were suddenly at his feet, and then stumbled back to the others. All of a sudden he was terribly tired. And then as he reached his grandfather the sound of pounding at the gate started up again. Chapter 36. Chapter text. Tyrion. If Jamie had looked bad before, then he looked worse now. He had dark circles around his eyes, which seemed to have lost their old sparkle and life. He sat there at the table and carefully, almost laboriously, wrote out his confession, taking his time over it. He had some notes to one side that he would consult now and then, and his tongue sometimes protruded from his lips ever so slightly, something that Tyrion hadn't witnessed for some time, not since they had been a lot younger. He knew how much Jamie hated writing. He'd come to learning it later than Cersei and far later than Tyrion had. Father had had to take personal charge of teaching Jamie to write, and it had not been easy for his brother. From the sheen of sweat on Jamie's forehead he was very likely reliving some of those lessons, memories of father's dry tones and caustic comments of encouragement. On and on it went, agonizingly so. The scrape of the quill on the paper, punctuated by the subtly different scrape of the quill being dipped in the little bottle of ink. Sometimes Jamie would pause and frown and then go on to write again, as if he was concentrating on the next word. And then, finally, it was all over. He placed the quill down with a slightly shaking hand and then pushed the confession across the table towards Mayor Stillowin, who looked it over carefully, shook some sand over it to dry the excess ink, and then handed it over to the two silent other men at the far end of the room. Stannis Baratheon and Sir Barristan Selmy had witnessed every moment of Jamie's confession. Now they read it and contempt radiated off them. Selmy looked as if he wanted to rip Jamie's head off with his bare hands there and then, but was somehow restraining himself with a monumental effort. It seemed to pass muster, because Stannis Baratheon carefully folded it, jerked his head at Selmy, and they both then stalked out, still grim of face. Lewin sighed as he picked up the writing implements and then peered carefully at Jamie. "Sir Jamie," he said carefully. "How is your wound?" "It hurts," Jamie said shortly. "It is early yet, but it looks as if it is starting to heal." "Does it hurt enough to stop you from eating?" Jamie pulled a slight face. "No. Yet your guards tell me that you eat next to nothing." His brother looked as if he was tired of this conversation. "I have little appetite." "You must eat, sir. Your body is healing and it cannot heal without food. And I will not see you starve yourself." I will talk some sense into my brother, Tyrion interjected. Thank you, Maester Lewin. The old man nodded to him, looked at Jaime, and then left on quiet feet. As the door closed, Tyrion looked at Jaime and suppressed a groan. Jaime was sitting there with a haunted expression on his face. What is wrong, brother? But Jaime did not answer. Instead he stood and went to the nearest window, where he just stared at the horizon. Eventually he finally said, I need a favor, Tyrion. Name it. I want to go the wall as soon as possible. He paused and then frowned. You do? Then inspiration hit. Ah. You want to leave before father arrives? A sigh escaped his brother. Yes. Can you blame me? Given that father will arrive here in a rage, no, Jaime. I don't blame you. Do you want me to talk to Ned Stark? An odd look crossed Jaime's face, a combination of shame, anger and humiliation. Yes, he ground out eventually. Please, Tyrion. There was a pause. I'll talk to Ned, Tyrion muttered. There was a lot he needed to talk to him about anyway, things that Jaime would never understand. Ned. You sound almost like a man of the North already, brother. I know what faces them. What faces all of us? He looked at Jaime. Ned Stark will demand that you swear your oath on the Fist of Winter. Ah, yes, Stark's new mace. Or old mace. What of it? An oath on the fist is not something to take lightly. Jaime looked at him oddly. How so? I was there when the fist killed Sir Willem Bootle, Jaime. He laid his hand it, swore that he was innocent, and then he flew across the room, to land stone dead and smoking lightly. Ned Stark did not lay a finger on him. It was all the fist. It is old, brother, and it has power. An oath on it has meaning. Jaime looked away. Do you doubt my word? He said thickly, even you? No, Tyrion replied quickly. I know you. There was another silence. The guards vary in their names for me, Jaime said eventually. Some call me Kingslayer. Others call me Oathbreaker. They think that I scorn oaths. Tyrion pulled a face. I know that you do not. You killed Aerys because there was no other alternative. No raven has come from King's Landing yet, but I do not need one. I heard it in your voice. A long moment of silence fell. And my second oath. Ah, here was a time to tread carefully over very thin ice, and for once words failed him. Cersei, you always. I mean that. She led me astray, Jaime said tiredly. I never could refuse her. He looked about with a tired smile. And here I am, as a consequence. Broken on the wheel of foolishness. Bound for the wall. You have seen it. Will I need fur linings for my small clothes? You will need advice in what to wear, Tyrion replied, his eyes searching every inch of his brother's face. Jaime, you must not give up. Give up what? Jaime asked tiredly. The fight to live. There's going to be a war at the wall. A war that we must win. Your war against the dead. And legends. Against Snooks and Grum. Tyrion smashed his fist down against the table, making his brother jump. Don't be a fool. You saw that cage. You heard the tales, from me, and the Starks and Uncle Geryon. Whites are real. The others are real, Jaime. When you join the Night's Watch, you are not going into a cold and dull exile, you will be entering a war zone. War marches on the wall, war brought by enemies that are terrible in a way that you cannot imagine. Do you think that what I saw, what I fought against, what I killed was a trick? Forget whatever poison Cersei dribbled into your ears, Jaime. You are going to the wall, and there you will be defending all of us. All of Westeros. So you will eat and not waste away, you will fight at the wall, and you will not take the chance to throw yourself off it. You want to die at the moment, brother, I see it in your face. No, enough of such foolishness. You are the best warrior I know of. You must fight to defend us all. And with that he stormed out, without a glance back at his astonished brother. Right. He needed to talk to Ned. Catelyn. Lewin was pleased with the progression of her pregnancy so far. He peered at her, prodded gently, asked the usual questions, drew his eyebrows down in thought once or twice, and generally looked satisfied. and then he coughed slightly and slid his hands into the arms of his robes. "My lady, Lord Stark has asked me to request that you take it as easy as you can in the coming months." It was a familiar request and she smiled a little and replied with the familiar response, "I shall do if I can. Winterfell must be run." "I recognize that, my lady, especially with his grace the king here along with the court. Perhaps if you could involve the Lady Sansa a little more. She is of an age, and will need to learn how to run a great house when she marries Lord Domeric." That was a good point. It is time that she learned these things. "I will admit that, Lewin. I will talk to her. In the meantime I will try to rest as much as I can." Lewin beetled his eyebrows at her for a moment and then smiled that little smile of his. "Very well, my lady." And then he looked over her shoulder and blinked a little. "Your pardon, Lady Baratheon, I did not see you there." Surprised, she turned to look at the doorway. Sliss Baratheon was standing there, clutching her skirts and looking strained. "Lady Baratheon," she said, as she stood up and pulled her dress straight. "How may I help you?" The tall woman with the large ears swallowed visibly and then nodded jerkily at her. "Lady Stark. I was told that Maester Lewin was here. I need to speak with him on a matter of a personal nature." Lewin blinked a little and then spread his hands. "I am at your disposal, Lady Baratheon. Should you need to speak confidentially, then I hope that Lady Stark might be able to grant us a place to speak in here." Sliss Baratheon visibly wavered on this for a long moment. "Perhaps you might both be able to assist me on this," she muttered. And then she swallowed. "I think that I am with child." Kat looked at her carefully. She wanted to congratulate her, but there was something about the other woman. She was as stiff as a board, her face an emotionless mask, but her eyes kept flickering back and forth whilst her fingers twitched at her robes. She looked as if she was torn between terror and joy. Lewin cleared his throat to one side, shot her a glance that showed that he was seeing the same things that she was, and then stepped forwards. "Perhaps, with your permission, I might be allowed to ask you a few things." Sliss nodded choppily, before walking over to one side where she talked quietly with Lewin. Kat watched for a moment and then bustled to her little desk to one side, where she made some notes about what needed to be done in terms of feeding the court over the next week. Fortunately, the presence of so many men who liked hunting meant that meat was not a problem, and then in fact they would end up in a better place than she had planned. As she put the quill down and stopped the little bottle of ink, she looked up. Sliss Baratheon had an odd look on her face, one where joy was just ahead of terror. "I think, my lady," Lewin said carefully, "that you are indeed with child. Congratulations." She looked at him with a slightly wild expression. "Congratulations, Maester Lewin. I have only ever brought one child to birth successfully. Shireen. The others. I have had miscarriages. And stillbirths. I have had my heart broken again and again. I have not been able to give my husband a male heir and now," her face twisted in a look of anguish, before she seemed to recall where she was and seemed to force her face clear of any emotion. Lewin slid his hands into his sleeves and shot Kat a quiet look of concern under his eyebrows. "I understand, Lady Baratheon," he said gravely. "Perhaps I might ask some more questions, on a confidential basis." Another choppy nod and Kat returned to her list as the other two carried out a conversation in low tones. She could tell that Lewin was doing his best to be quietly supportive. When the voices finally fell silent again, she looked up. Lewin was deep in thought. "Lady Baratheon," he said eventually. "You had your stillbirths on Dragonstone, I believe." A nod. "Various maesters have long debated the impact of noxious humors from the volcano there. I would strongly suggest that you remain here in Winterfell for the duration of your pregnancy. No travel that might tire you, no stress, and only gentle exercise. Lady Stark here has delivered 5 children to term, with a 6th on the way, and I can assure you that I will do my best to assist you in a successful pregnancy here in Winterfell." Sliss looked at him for a long moment and then nodded jerkily. Then she looked at Kat with a complicated expression on her face, one that combined envy, admiration, shame and hope. "Thank you, Maester Lewin. And to you, Lady Stark. I will pray in the godswood later, to beseech the old gods for a healthy boy. As strong as his father." Another choppy nod and then she swept out. Kat watched her go, and when the door closed she sighed. "I almost wanted to hug her, but I feared that she would take offense. Yes, my lady. She will be difficult. But I think that she will listen to me. To have had so many stillbirths, well, I would blame the environment on Dragonstone. I would also suggest that we keep a close eye on who serves her food. Her eyebrows went up. You suspect poison? He pursed his lips for a moment. I would rather not take any chances. Environment is one thing, possible poison is another. Some women, regrettably, have more trouble than others in bearing children. Lady Baratheon might be one of those. I will observe her closely and let you know my thoughts on this. Thank you, Lewin. Now, what of the former queen and the children? Cersei Lannister has stopped throwing her food at the guards. I suspect that she realized that unless she stopped doing so she would remain hungry. She also remains angry. Her threats have been most inventive. She closed her eyes for a long moment and sighed. Wretched woman. I have always disliked her. Does she still regard herself as being queen? She does, my lady. I will have a word with Ned and the king. And the others. Young Tommen is disconsolate, but I have been able to entertain him with some rather weighty tomes on cats. He seems very interested in them. As for Myrcella, I was going to ask you to talk to her, my lady. She realizes with a clarity that I thought was beyond her years just how much all this will affect her future. She is a cleverer girl than I had thought. A kind girl too. She sighed again. I will talk to her. None of this is her fault. And Joffrey. Lewin's face tightened. An unpleasant boy. He is almost as delusional as his mother. He refuses to believe what has happened to him. He still gives orders and then has a tantrum when they are not obeyed. I beg your pardon, but I am heartily glad that he will not be king. His behavior, well, I am minded of the history that Lord Robb remembers from that other time. That made her shiver a little. The boy had ordered the death of Ned in that other history, something that made her feel a chill even now. I am most glad as well. Keep the boy fed and warn the servants about him. There is a cruelty about him and an arrogance that I don't want to see inflicted on anyone. The old maester bowed to her and then left. She picked up her list and looked at it. Winterfell wouldn't run itself, she had much to do. Willers. He had always liked Grandfather's Solar. It was big and airy and had a lot of books in it, and he had promised himself that when the time came to take over Father's Solar he'd model it after Grandfather's one. That time was now looming closer than he wanted to think about. In fact, he would give anything to postpone that moment. He rubbed his hands over his face and stared out of the window at where the Honeywine met the sea. Every hour at the moment was an additional gift. He clutched at those hours, embraced them. Father was not dead yet. The Septon that he had rescued was dead. He had died within an hour of that incident, that horrible encounter at the gate. The poor man's skull had been broken, along with much of his face, with the sound of his breathing being a horrible groaning gurgle, until the moment that it had ceased completely. As for the Septon who had run, well, he had been found in the lowest level of the high tower, gibbering with fear and caked with his own filth. He had been screaming something about the voices in his head and was now restrained, having been scrubbed from head to toe and then dosed into unconsciousness with a massive dose of the milk of the poppy. And then there was the Septon of the Starry September. His bones, if they could even still be called that, given that they were little more than slimy pieces of rotted filth, had been burned and then returned to the stunned senior priests of what had once been the most important September in West Eos. But Father still lived. He was shrunken, palsied, attended by maesters, but he still lived, and Willers wanted to cling to that fact. Feet scuffed at the doorway and then a pair of knuckles rapped at the door. He looked up tiredly to see Loras standing there. His brother was red-eyed and almost shaking with tiredness. "You need to come," Loras muttered. "Father is awake." He stood at once, eagerly, but then he saw the look on the face of Loras. "What's wrong?" Loras stood there, his face working with misery prevalent on his face. They say that Father is dying. That he does not have long left to live. It might be true. Father is desperate to see you. You should hurry." For a long horrible moment he stood there, and then he grabbed Otherbane and he ran. Various guards watched him go and he cared not what they thought of his passage, but he knew that he had to get to the room where father had been taken as fast as possible. When he finally arrived, he could tell at once that the situation was grave. Grandfather was standing at the doorway, talking in low and intent tones with Maester Olwyn, the healer who had been sent over by the citadel in a desperate effort to find out what was wrong with father. When grandfather saw him, his face went taut. "Your father wants to see you," the Lord of the High Tower said gently as he walked up to them both. And then he looked at Willers and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You must be strong," he muttered. And then, "I'm proud of you, my boy." He nodded at grandfather and then walked with trembling legs into the room, which was dominated by the bed that father had been placed on too. He was staring up at the ceiling, blinking only occasionally, and his face was thin and lined. Willers looked back at Maester Olwyn. "How is he suddenly so thin?" The older man shrugged helplessly. "I know not, Lord Willers." Tease as if whatever he confronted sucked the life out of him. It drained him. How he kept his sanity and life when the others did not. "I know not. He is a strong man, your father. But he is coming to the end of his strength. He does not have long left. You should talk to him." Willers closed his eyes for a long moment. This was the moment that he had been dreading since the confrontation at the gate, but he did not want this to happen. He did not want to take over from father at all. Who would? But he steeled himself and then walked over to the bed. Garland was already in the room sitting by the bed, and he stood up, as red-eyed as Laura's, yielding the chair to Willers. He hugged his brother gently and then sat down and took father's hand in his. "Father. It's me." Willers. Slowly, oh so very slowly, father turned his head to look at him, and he did his best not to blanch at the look in those almost lifeless eyes. But then the eyes seemed to focus and then come alive. "Willers. It's me, father." Father's shaking hand clutched at his. "Good, that you are here. I heard about the septon. So sorry. So sorry. Shouldn't have come." Willers shook his head. "You've nothing to apologize for, father. You couldn't have known." But father seemed to disagree, because his face worked for a long moment as he seemed to fight off a bout of tears. "I should have never come here. Stupid of me. Prideful of me. I wanted to lead the Reach again. Father. You need to stop him." He paused and peered at his father. "Stop who?" The thing behind the gate." I heard him. He is a terrible creature. He is dead, but cannot die. He wants to die but keeps living. He is a mad creature. A terrible creature. The call, it woke him. He is mad. Enraged. You beat him back. I know why. You wield other bane now. It repels him. For a while. Willers stared at his father for a moment. For a while. What do you mean, father? Tears started from father's eyes. Because he will fight you. Blight you. Beware. Blight. His influence brings blight. Horror stole over him. Father, whatever is behind the gate will blight the harvest. Afflict the Reach. Father nodded jerkily. And then he clutched at his hand again. He's afraid. Afraid of the Stark. Of what the Stark wields. You must call him. Only way to kill him. To kill a god. This was madness. He stared at father. There is a god behind the gate. This time father flailed at his hand. Yes. Yes. I heard him. Madness. He is beyond mad. You must hold him back. The fist. The fist will kill him. The fist. Whose fist? Father's face worked for a long moment. Ned Stark. He has it. And then he slumped back onto the bed, his face slackening, as did his grip. Willers stared at that slackening hand, and then at father's face. And then he took it his hands and wept as he realized that father's eyes were lifeless. Oberyn. The stink of King's Landing was something that could be smelled far out to sea, like a miasma of corruption that really said everything about the wretched place. He leant against the railing of the ship and stared at the city with a certain amount of wry loathing. It would always be the place where Elia had died, at the hands of the mountain. One day his vengeance would come. One day. He looked up at the Red Keep and pulled a slight face. Well, at least Robert Baratheon wasn't there. The Fat King was up in Winterfell, investigating this coal business with the Tooth Grinder and Ned Stark, who was probably back there now after his trip to the Wall. He wished that news of Sorrela was more up to date. The last he'd heard was that she was on her way to the Night Fort, along with that astonishing news that she was on the trail of Geryon Lannister. Interesting. Well, perhaps there would be a letter on its way to him. He'd sent a raven ahead of him to warn his personal agent in this stinking shithole of a city, and if Sorrela had sent any letters to him by ships that stopped at King's Landing, they would be there waiting for him. The first thing that struck him as the ship moored at the jetty was that the gold cloaks that he could see seemed different. Less slovenly than the last time he had visited the city. They did not lean on their shields, they did not have rust on their spears, and they did not seem to be taking bribes openly from people. He raised a languid eyebrow and then peered at the city itself. That, at least, was still the same. Gods, it stank. Will you go to the Red Keep? He looked at the captain of the ship, who had once again displayed that uncanny ability of sneaking up on him, and who was once again dressed in those tight breeches that showed off her slim, almost boyish, ass. Silver Sand was of determinedly mixed parentage, could outswear an Ironborn, was nowhere near as pretty as Elaria, who was back at Sunspear, and was an absolute handful in the bunk of his cabin. It was like fucking a snake at times. Depends on a few things, he muttered, as he watched a new gold cloak appear, an older man with a tuft of grey in his brown hair and one oddly foreshortened hand. He was looking at the ship with a knowledgeable squint. The gold cloaks seemed to be much changed. The Onion Knight has knocked some honesty into them, Sand replied, before glowering at a nearby sailor and snapping at him for not coiling a rope correctly. Then she looked back at him. That's him down there. The famous Knight of Onions. He straightened and then looked at her. I'll be back in a bit. As he strolled down the gangplank and then reached the wharf, he sobered a little. Sir Davos Seaworth had been one of the men who had been there when Lord Dane had died, and he owed him his thanks for that at the very least. You are Sir Davos, I have been told. The other man nodded and then bowed awkwardly. Prince Oberyn Martell, I believe. I heard that you had arrived. Be welcome to King's Landing. If you are not too much in a hurry, Lord Oberyn would like to see you. He raised both eyebrows for a moment, brushed his moustache languidly, inspected the sky, his boots, the nearby inn where there was a woman with astonishing large breasts leaning out of a window, and then back at Seaworth, who was just stolidly looking back at him. Oh, very well. Do you have a horse? Yes, there was a horse, and not a bad one, and as they rode up the hill towards the Red Keep he looked at the main gate. There was a rotting head there on a spike, and as he passed under it he stared at it and then gave it a mocking little salute. Petter Baelish's features were just about recognizable under a layer or three of pitch. You knew him? Seaworth asked curiously as they drew rein and then dismounted. I met him once, Oberyn replied as he handed his reins to a groom. And I distrusted him at once. But since he died he has given Dawn so very much gold after we were allowed to appropriate his holdings on our land. The bloody man had tendrils everywhere, Seaworth growled as he led him towards the Tower of the Hand. The entrance there was guarded by a pair of guards in Arryn colours, who knocked at the door as they approached, resulting in the appearance of what looked like a steward of some kind who bowed at him. Prince Oberyn. Lord Arryn will see you at once. The inside of the tower still had a very much Vale appearance, Arryn colours, clunky furniture, the general Andal solidity and, well, boring stolidity. That said, there were a few other things that stood out. It looked as if many things had been packed up and not replaced with anything just yet. As for Arryn himself, he was standing up from behind a desk and walking towards him. The old man did not look as bad as he had heard, but there was a hitch in his step and something about his eyes that spoke of something that was more than tiredness. Prince Oberyn, Arryn said quietly as he bowed slightly to him and then held out a hand. Welcome to King's Landing. Thank you, Lord Arryn, Oberyn replied as he bowed a little himself and then shook hands with the older man. You wished to see me? Arryn nodded and then waved a hand to the entirely nondescript man who was standing to one side of the room and who immediately bustled about, pouring wine from a flagon that had obviously been airing for some time. A look and a sniff at the proffered goblet soon told him why. "You have some of the 53. A noble vintage Dornish wine at its finest." A slight smile played around Orin's lips as he sipped from his own goblet. "I admired it at the time and it has only matured with age. I laid down quite a bit of it." Oberyn sipped himself, resisted the temptation to smack Hayes' lips and instead sank into the nearest chair and then put his feet up upon the edge of the desk in front of him. Orin's servant scowled. Orin merely looked slightly amused as he sat on the other side of the desk. "You do not mind?" Oberyn asked with a wry smile and a wave of the hand at his feet. "It's no longer my desk," Orin replied. "I am merely helping out until Lord Stannis Baratheon, the present hand, returns from Winterfell. I am tired. Recent events have rather underlined the fact that I need to the Vale and begin to muster its resources." The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end for a moment, but he hid it by sipping more wine and glancing about the place. "I was sorry to hear about the attack on your person," he replied, using quite a bit of equivocation. Frankly, he did not care a jot about Orin's health. "I understand that your wife has been caught." Orin leant back in his chair and flickered an eyebrow briefly at him. "She has," he said flatly. "A trial will be arranged. It is all, most unfortunate. But such is life. In the meantime, may I ask you why you have come to King's Landing?" Ah, now here was the moment. He took another sip. "The call," he admitted eventually. "I am here on behalf of my brother, Prince Doran. This call has been heard by many of the stony Dornish who have the blood of the first men most strongly within them." He sighed a little. "Lord Dane was one of them. On behalf of Sunspear, I would like to thank you for what you did to ease his passing." "Thanks, Sir Davos Seaworth. He was at the docks when Lord Dane's ship came in and arranged for him to be brought to a comfortable room in a nearby building at once, whilst Sir Jaime Lannister, who was also there, sent a guard to get Edric Dane at once. He was barely there in time." He suppressed a snarl at the mention of the word Lannister, and instead nodded. "We heard that he passed Dawn on to his son before he died. And that the new Lord Dane had departed for Winterfell. Like so many others are inside. I take it that you have questions about the call." He sipped more wine and then pulled a slight face. "Oh, only several dozen, many of which can be boiled down to a few, such as how it was sent out, not to mention why it was sent out. The words are echoing all around the land, my lord. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. The others, Lord Orin. Surely they are nothing more than a myth. But as to how the call was sent out, magic must have been involved, and that makes me curious." Orin looked at him with hooded eyes and then he sighed a little. "A long overdue message came in from Winterfell a day ago. Apparently Lord Stark's ancestors created, or inherited, an artifact. An object. It sent out the call. As to why it sent out the call, well, there is something you need to see. Your timing is excellent. The previous object was replaced by another one." And with that he stood and gestured at the door, before walking to it. Confused, Oberyn drained the last of the excellent wine and then followed the old man out of the door, down the stairs and then out into the courtyard. By the time they reached the throne room, Oberyn was truly baffled, especially by the look on the faces of the men who had passed them in opposite direction coming from the room with that accursed chair. All had been pale and a few looked as if they were trembling. Orin had a word with the guards at the door, who nodded at him, and then led Oberyn in. Before the Iron Throne there was a small table, and on that table there was a small cage. And within that cage was the severed head of a woman. It was hard to see, the head was facing away from them and there was something odd about it. It was not a fresh head, but there was no smell that normally accompanied such a thing. He was about to ask when in the name of the Seven Hells was going on when two things happened. The first thing was that he noticed that the head was that of a woman. The second thing was that her eyes were open and she was watching him, and then the head opened its mouth and hissed at him. Despite himself he flinched for a moment, and then he drew on every ounce of self-control, every scrap of proud restraint, and forced himself to smile. "Very interesting," he drawled. "Is it real or a toy from MYR? Take a closer look at it. You can pick the cage up if you like. Just don't stick your finger in anywhere near its mouth. An idiot from the Vale did that. He lost the first joint of his hand. Oberyn raised a languid eyebrow at the old man and then picked the cage up and shook it slightly so that the head fell over. And at its base, were severed tendons and the gleam of white bone where the spine was. The mouth hissed again and the eyes swiveled furiously around to try and glare at him. No wires. No levers. No metal. It was real. He suppressed the sudden need to swallow as his mouth and throat were suddenly extremely dry. A slight tilt of the cage restored the head to an upright position and then he placed the cage back down on the table and backed away from it. The head of a white, he said eventually. I have never seen anything like it. Few have, Oberyn replied tiredly as he sat on a stool that a guard had brought for him. Our friend over there brought the cage down from Castle Black. The cage replaces another one that had the head of a male white that is now being taken down the Rosa Road to High Garden. He looked to one side and saw the silent figure in black that had been standing in the shadows to one side. Then he turned back to the cage and inspected it closely. What metal is this made from? We do not know, the man from the Night's Watch rumbled in a low voice. The cages are the work of the first men. They slow the rotting of what is placed within them. There are runes on them, my lord. He peered at the cage again. Yes, there were indeed runes. Proof of whites. I said the man in black, before stepping back into the shadows. Oberyn studied the head for a long moment, taking in everything about it. He had to write to Doran immediately about this. If whites existed, then what of these others? The call had been sent out for a reason. This was important, vitally so perhaps. It was no wonder that the stony Dornish were reacting in the way that they were. His feet twitched a bit and he repressed the need to pace restlessly. Instead he walked slowly around the table, thinking hard. I will write to Sunspear, he said quietly. My brother must know of this before I leave for Winterfell. Then he smiled crookedly at Oberyn. Dorne has not had much of a presence at King's Landing since Robert Baratheon took the throne. That might change. Oberyn looked back at the head in a cage. I have travelled far and seen many odd things, Lord Oberyn. I have seen the House of the Undying in Karth. I have seen the flashes of light on the horizon that show the location of where the 14 flames used to be. I have had my fortune told by a midge whose face seemed to change even as she spoke to me, who told me that if the wind stayed from the south I would die when a mountain fell on me, but that if it changed and came from the north that I would live to see the sun rise in front of me. But I have never seen anything like that. Whites do indeed exist. He shook his head in astonishment. A strange day. Strange times. Oberyn nodded slowly and was about to open his mouth and say something when they both heard the sound of hurrying, almost running at times boots, and then Oberyn's man from the Tower of the Hand burst in, his eyes searching for Oberyn. The moment he saw him he all but ran over and then held up 2 raven scrolls that had red ribbons at the top. From the Ravenry, in the Tower of the Hand, my lord, he panted. They arrived almost at the same time. Something happened to Oberyn's face the moment that he saw the scrolls, a mixture of hope and fear. But then he reached out with a steady hand and took the scrolls, broke the small seals on them and then read each one quickly. Identical messages with the seal of Stannis Baratheon, he muttered, before pausing. They did it. The 3 words were said in almost a whisper. Then the old man looked up and there was something in his eyes that made Oberyn straighten almost to attention for a moment. Quill. My lord. Has the number of red cloaks in the Red Keep and City changed at all since your report this morning? No, my lord. Tell the men to get ready at once. Lord Baratheon has succeeded. The other man bowed and then ran out again. As he watched him go, Oberyn felt his scalp prickle. Something was happening, something important. And it sounded as if some Lannister soldiers were about to have a very bad day. The question was why? What was going on? It wasn't every day that anyone connected with the Tower of the Hand admitted that it had a Ravenry for a start. Oberyn seemed to be lost deep in thought for a long moment, tapping his upper lip with one of the scrolls, and then he looked up and fixed Oberyn with a commanding gaze. It seems that you will have a great deal to write about in your letter to Prince Doran, he said softly, before looking around carefully and then handing over one of the scrolls. Frowning, Oberyn unrolled it and then squinted at the tiny writing, and then as he read each word he found his eyes widening. Cersei Lannister discovered fornicating with Jaime Lannister, he read. Witnessed by Lords Stark and Baratheon and Sir B. Selmy. Doubt cast on parentage of royal children. C. and J. Lannister arrested on charges of treason. King Robert has divorced C. Lannister. Tests on parentage of children to commence via Stormbreaker. Once he had read it, he then reread it, because he could not believe it. No, the words were still the same. 1,000 emotions ripped through him, ranging from total incredulity to utter glee. "Oh, I think that my brother will be very interested in this," he said eventually, keeping an iron control over his features. "Very interested indeed." Arryn paused and then seemed to look at one area of the room by the Iron Throne. When he looked back, his eyes seemed to be hooded with some undefinable emotion. "You are, I believe, a man of combat ability." "I have been in a few fights. I am not known as the Red Viper of Dawn for no reason." "Then perhaps you might agree to lead the party that will disarm the few Lannister forces remaining in the Red Keep." Oh, now this was going to be good. He nodded. "I don't think that a spear would be a good choice in this case. I wonder if I might be allowed to borrow a sword." But first he had to go to the privy, where he laughed so hard and so long that his face hurt and the tears poured his face. Ned. The arrival of Robert and Stannis had had one good effect in terms of the tidal wave of paper from the south that was threatening to engulf his desk these days. Much of it could be signed and then passed quickly onto the hand of the king to be dealt with. But there were other issues all the same, ones that only he could handle, albeit with much grumbling. It was increasingly obvious that he would have to ride down to Barrowtown soon to deal with Barbary Bloody Dustin and the fog that still lingered on the barrows there. Lewin had gone through the records twice now and had found nothing but hints of fragments of bits of legends. The problem was that the fall of the Barrow Kings had been before the rise of the Maestas, not to mention the rise of records that were not carved on rock. Written records were scanty at best. Legend had it that the Great Barrow held the body of the first king, the very first king of the first men, the man who had led them into Westeros. According to legend, the Barrow was also cursed. He didn't like the sound of that. If old things were waking up and old legends like the others were walking the land, then what about old curses? He sighed and then scowled a little. Right. After this business with the Lannisters was settled, then he'd travel south. With the Fist. And Lord Brandon Dustin, the sandy-haired and rather diffident man who had been with the Company of the Rose, would go with him, along with his 3 sons. And if Barbary Bloody Dustin objected to the presence of a cadet branch of House Dustin, then they would have words. Knuckles rapped on the door and he looked up. Tyrion Lannister was standing there, dressed in dark grey clothing and with a look of extreme seriousness on his face. "Lord Stark, may I speak with you?" "Ah." There were a number of possible topics that might require a face that serious, and he stood and gestured for the other man to enter. "Please close the door behind you, Lord Tyrion." Tyrion nodded, shut the door and then walked over and took a seat in front of him. He then paused and stared at his feet, the wall, the ceiling, Ned's face, his feet again and then back at Ned. "I need to talk to you, Lord Stark." "I'd gathered that," Ned said dryly, and Tyrion blushed a little. "What exactly do you want to talk to me about?" There was a long pause as Tyrion seemed to literally brace himself as if he was about to face an onslaught. "Aha!" Ned suspected that he knew what this was about now. "Lord Stark," Tyrion finally said after an excruciating pause. "I would like to ask if I might be allowed to talk to you about the, marital circumstances of your cousin, the Lady Daisy Sherestone." It was indeed as he had suspected. "You may." Tyrion seemed to suppress the need to flex various joints in his fingers and then he stared at Ned. "I would consider it a high honor, the greatest honor of my life, if I might be considered as a prospect for her future husband. I mean, as a candidate for her hand." He seemed to be very nervous and he actually stumbled over his words for an instant. "You mean you would like to marry her?" Tyrion stopped still and then he nodded. "I would. I know that there are many factors that would argue against it. I am a dwarf. And I am a Lannister, a family that is now not in high favor in Westeros. And..." Ned cut the poor bloody man off with an upraised hand. "Daisy had a word with me beforehand, as you well know. I am fully aware of what your family is like. I am also aware of what you are like. That you fought next to my sons not once but twice, at the night fort and beyond the wall. You have killed whites. You have killed another. And, above all, you saved Daisy at that inn. Tyrion straightened a little in the chair and then looked at Ned with a little nod. Thank you, Lord Stark. Daisy is a remarkable woman. She is intelligent. She is wise with the knowledge that she has from our shared love of books. She is beautiful. He struggled for a moment with some undefinable emotion. I love her. Ned regarded him thoughtfully. The man was deeply earnest. I think that you need to know that I am deeply fond of my cousin, Lord Tyrion, and that I will not be very happy with anyone who upsets her. Should I agree to her marrying anyone, I would want certain assurances that she will be happy in her marriage. I know that such a thing is hardly a normal condition of betrothal, but given what happened with Bootle I think that I am within my rights to do so. A ghost of a smile crossed Tyrion's face. I was told on the ride to Castle Black by Lord Umber that many northern lords would be cross with anyone who acted incorrectly around her. And then he nodded. I would be willing to swear an oath on the fist of winter that she would never have reason to regret marrying me. Ned forced his eyebrows to stay in place at such bold words. Instead he nodded in recognition. He was about to ask the question that had been lurking in the back of his mind when Tyrion flushed a little and then said, in terms of prospects I have to admit that I do not have very many. I may be Tywin Lannister's son, but I have never been acknowledged as his heir. I am a dwarf. And my mother died in giving birth to me. Father has never forgiven me for either, crime. It has therefore never been a secret that my father wants Jaime to inherit Casterly Rock when he dies. I always wondered about that, Ned muttered. Members of the King's Guard cannot inherit. This time the smile that crossed Tyrion's face was a bitter one. Father always hoped that Jaime would somehow at some point be released from his white cloak. And now that your brother is swapping his white cloak for a black one. A shrug was the response to that question. I don't know. Father's wrath will rival that of the Doom of Valyria, if on a small and more terrifyingly quiet scale, but I would be lying to you if I said that I could predict what my father will do now. I might be appointed his heir. He might make my uncle Kevan his heir. He might marry again. I do not know. But it is possible that should I marry Daisy I might not inherit land or title or even coin. You need to know that. Ned looked at the Lannister who sitting opposite him for a long moment. If he said eventually, your father appoints anyone but you as his heir, then he is a far greater fool than I ever thought him to be. That or far more petulant. You have finished the report you were working on for him. I have. Drawings and all. Good. I must think about this matter, for the sake of propriety and custom, but she wants to marry you and I think the match to be a good one, so I have to tell you now that I will look on your proposal most favorably. Tyrion seemed to freeze in place. You will. The words came out as a squeak, and he then repeated them in a deliberately low and gruff voice. You will. I will. I expected more questions. Ned coughed slightly. I do have a few. There has never been any stories of your fathering bastards, despite your reputation. Tyrion sighed a bit. I make no excuse that I do have a reputation, Lord Stark. I am fond of ale and wine and I have frequented my fair share of establishments. Such things were often done out of boredom or even just to have some friendly so to speak company. My father, as I said, does not like me. Parental affection has always been beyond rare. He has also always made it very clear that should I disgrace the family with bastards then I would have to dispose of them. Before he did. As a result the very best Moontear has always been at my disposal. Ah. That explained that. I suggest that you never get bored around Daisy then. She will expect children. Tyrion seemed to struggle with his face for a moment and then he nodded curtly. Japing about that sentiment would, it just struck me, be a bad idea. Very bad. Ned frowned and then he smiled, stood and held his hand out. I will talk to the family. Oh, and you can call me Ned in private. Would I be right in thinking that you need to talk to your own father? You would, Tyrion said as his answering smile and handshake gave way to a frown. He will be surprised but he should have no reason to refuse this. He'd better not. His sails have been sighted off Flint's Finger 2 days ago. There's no word yet on which way he'll come to Moat Cailin and the King's Road, or up the rivers to Torrens Square, or even Barrowtown. Tyrion's head nodded jerkily. He will be angry when he hears about all that has happened here. I know, Ned replied. I will talk to him as soon as he gets here. I am not responsible for what has happened though, and neither are you. This seemed to really amuse Tyrion. Oh, he'll find a way to blame me somehow. But thank you for agreeing to talk to me and to my father. Ned nodded and returned to his desk and the paperwork. After a moment he realized that Tyrion had paused by the still closed door. One last thing, Ned. We do need to talk about how your son Robb died.